On this particular evening, an exploration would commence, guiding one through the intricate systems of ancient Greek jurisprudence and the subtle, yet impactful, forms of retribution which profoundly influenced the societal fabric of a burgeoning civilization. These narratives transcend the grandeur of mythical heroes or the terror of monstrous antagonists, delving instead into the deeply human essence, the quotidian mechanisms through which individuals confronted transgressions, societal opprobrium, and the inevitable repercussions within a societal construct markedly divergent from contemporary understanding. As the ambient distractions of the day recede, allowing for a moment of tranquil contemplation, the journey would commence with an account detailing the peculiar convergence of metal, conflagration, and the unorthodox methodologies by which justice was once administered in the ancient epoch. One might envision oneself observing the intense Mediterranean sun of ancient Sicily, approximately 560 BC, as skilled artisans meticulously applied the final embellishments to an artifact of unparalleled peculiarity. This object manifested as a bovine effigy, yet bore no resemblance to the living creatures that roamed pastoral landscapes. Constructed entirely from bronze, it possessed a hollow interior, accessible via a cleverly concealed portal on its flank. Its metallic surface radiated brilliance beneath the Mediterranean sun, simultaneously evoking both aesthetic admiration and profound dread. The architect behind this formidable bronze construct was an individual named Perillos, who harbored considerable self-congratulatory sentiments regarding his ingenuity. He had presented himself before the court of Phalaris, the autocratic ruler of Akragas, bearing what he perceived to be an exemplary offering for a potentate notorious for his severe disposition. With a profound genuflection, Perillos had addressed the tyrant, proclaiming, "Your Excellence, I have fabricated for you the most ingenious method of execution ever conceived." As the bronze workers continued to burnish the effigy's exterior, one could almost perceive the echoes of Perillos elucidating the intricacies of his creation to the formidable ruler. The designated individual for punishment would be incarcerated within the bull's confines, whereupon a conflagration would be kindled directly beneath the metallic structure. As the bronze progressively intensified in temperature, the fate of the occupant, the specific details of which are deemed too distressing for a serene narrative, would unfold. However, the aspect that elicited the greatest pride from Perillos was this. He had ingeniously engineered an intricate network of conduits and cavities within the bull's cranial section, specifically calibrated to transmute the agonizing shrieks of the victim into vocalizations strikingly similar to the deep bellowing of a live bull. The contemplation of such extensive creative ingenuity and artisanal mastery, being dedicated to an instrument explicitly conceived for the infliction of torment, is indeed profoundly unsettling. The bronze fabrication itself was, in all likelihood, of exceptional quality. One could readily visualize the countless hours devoted to refining each contour, guaranteeing the flawless integration of every joint, and burnishing every exterior plane until it gleamed with the luster of precious gold. Nevertheless, Phalaris, despite his inherent brutality, possessed an unexpected predilection for poetic justice, a quality Perillos had entirely overlooked. As chronicled by the venerable historian Diodorus Siculus, upon Perillos's completion of his invention's demonstration, the tyrant purportedly uttered words to the effect of, "Magnificent Perillos. Yet I propose that the inaugural individual to experience your creation should, in fact, be its very architect. Would you not agree? Consequently, Perilos was tragically destined to become the premier casualty of his own ingenious, albeit horrific, contraption. A chilling form of retributive fairness is discernible in this outcome. The notion that individuals who engineer apparatuses of torment may ultimately find themselves ensnared by their own malevolent designs. The narrative then transports one to the bustling agora, where intelligence of this extraordinary occurrence propagated through hushed conversations. The populace of antiquity held a profound appreciation for such narratives, accounts wherein ingenuity proves self-defeating, and the pursuer is tragically transformed into the pursued. Such a chronicle was destined to be recounted at communal repasts for successive generations, provoking collective headshakes in contemplation of the inherent absurdity of unchecked human aspiration. The bronze bull itself, positing its actual existence, would undoubtedly have necessitated an immense degree of craftsmanship for its fabrication. The metallurgy of bronze in ancient Sicily represented a highly refined artistic and technical discipline. Mastery would have been essential in formulating the optimal alloy, typically comprising approximately 90% copper and 10% tin, alongside the precise regulation of heating temperatures. The casting process would have involved multiple discrete components, subsequently conjoined through meticulous welding. Furthermore, the elaborate sound chambers, a source of considerable pride for Perilos, would have demanded an acoustical comprehension remarkably advanced for that historical period. A particularly compelling aspect of this narrative, however, resides in its potential fabrication. Its veracity remains significantly questionable. Indeed, numerous contemporary historians posit that the bronze bull represents a legendary account, functioning primarily as an allegorical lesson rather than an authenticated historical event. Ancient authors were profoundly drawn to such narratives due to their inherent capacity to impart profound moral teachings concerning excessive pride and the principles of retribution. The factual occurrence of the event holds less significance than the prevailing beliefs it fostered regarding the nature of justice and the implementation of penalties. One might then visualize a scene beneath the verdant canopy of an olive tree, observing an elderly raconteur captivating a cluster of children with this very tale. The elder narrator invariably incorporated embellishments and particulars likely absent from any formal historical record. These additions included descriptions of the bronze's dazzling sheen, the palpable consternation etched upon Perilos's countenance as he apprehended his impending doom, and the collective gasp of the multitude as they grasped the unfolding tragedy. Such elements, it is noted, naturally proliferate and expand with each successive rendition, a common characteristic of oral traditions. The narrative of the bronze bull subsequently integrated itself into a more expansive discourse concerning the nature of justice within the ancient world. Profound inquiries arose. Was it morally justifiable for a sovereign to retaliate against cruelty with an equivalent measure of harshness? Did Perilos's ultimate destiny constitute a deserved retribution? Or did Phalaris merely seize an opportunity to exhibit his own inherent savagery? These were queries that offered no facile resolutions in that era, nor do they present straightforward answers in the present day. As the balmy afternoon breezes carried the fragrant essence of wild thyme from the distant hills, one's contemplation might turn to the distinctly divergent perspectives on punishment held by the ancients. For these societies, A pervasive sentiment dictated that justice ought to be conspicuously manifested, publicly enacted, and dramatically staged. Conversely, a discreet punishment, such as a clandestine execution conducted away from public scrutiny, would have failed to fulfill the requisite societal objective. The bronze bull, irrespective of its historical authenticity, epitomized punishment as a grand spectacle. Its purpose was to be observed, discussed, and indelibly etched into collective memory. The intrinsic complexity and artistry of its design formed an integral component of its intended impact. A straightforward execution would not have engendered the same rich tapestry of narratives, the profound sense of dread, or the perception of divine retribution that a more intricately conceived penalty was capable of evoking. One might hypothetically ponder the artisans involved in the bull's construction, assuming its materialization. Were they cognizant of the ultimate purpose of their creation? Did they derive professional satisfaction from their labor? Or did a sense of revulsion accompany their meticulous polishing of the bronze? Given the societal structure, ancient craftsmen frequently comprised enslaved individuals or those of lower social standing, who were rarely afforded the prerogative of selecting their commissions. Their role was to execute tasks as commanded. The sun now commenced its descent over the undulating Sicilian hills, suffusing the firmament with a palette of fiery orange and deep violet hues, colors evocative of superheated bronze. From a remote pasture, the genuine bellow of a live bull could be heard, a sound utterly distinct from the simulated mechanical rendition that Perillos had so elaborately engineered. This juxtaposition of the organic and the manufactured, of tangible reality and ingenious fabrication, epitomized the numerous inherent contrasts prevalent throughout the ancient world. With the advent of twilight, one might ponder the myriad other narratives that originated from the court of Phalaris. His reign spanned a period of 16 years, ample duration for the accretion of numerous legends and widespread rumors. Among these, some recounted his alleged anthropophagy of infants, while others claimed he possessed the uncanny ability to detect falsehoods through an individual's exhalation. While the majority of these accounts were undoubtedly embellished, they nonetheless offer valuable insights into the contemporary perceptions of tyrannical rule and concentrated authority. The legend of the bronze bull has persisted through millennia precisely because it encapsulates fundamental truths regarding human disposition, our inherent capacity for malevolence, our curious appreciation for ironic retribution, and our profound captivation with intricately devised penalties. It functions effectively on numerous interpretive strata, serving simultaneously as a historical anecdote, a didactic moral instruction, and a captivating form of diversion. Within one's mental landscape, the bull might be envisioned one final time, reposing deserted in some neglected plaza, gradually acquiring the verdant patina of antiquity, characteristic of bronze, its intricate acoustic conduits now mute, its once burnished exterior coarsened by the elements. The confluence of such exquisite artistry and profound brutality thus diminishes into a mere curiosity, a poignant vestige from an epoch when the very essence of justice assumed a distinctly dissimilar guise. As consciousness gently recedes toward slumber, one might invariably contemplate the myriad other peculiar manifestations of justice prevalent in the ancient world. What additional intricate forms of retribution were conceived when the infliction of public disgrace and societal exile were deemed as potent and consequential as any corporeal chastisement? the aforementioned bronze bull of Sicilian origin might, in retrospect, appear almost compassionate when contrasted with the impending revelation from ancient Athens. In the approximate year 487 BC, within this region, a form of punishment existed that was so exhaustive and utterly comprehensive that it possessed the capacity to expunge an individual entirely from their established existence, all without the shedding of a solitary drop of blood. This practice bore the designation of ostracismos, or ostracism. Its initiation was remarkably uncomplicated, involving merely the inscription of a personal appellation upon a fragment of earthenware. The scene shifts to the Athenian agora on a brisk morning during the nascent phase of spring. The atmosphere was redolent with the aroma of olive oil emanating from adjacent merchant establishments, subtly mingled with the faint olfactory trace of wood smoke from domestic hearths. Surrounding observers, the citizenry began to convene, specifically, not the female inhabitants, nor the enslaved populace, nor the resident aliens, but exclusively the enfranchised free male citizens endowed with suffrage. Each individual carried diminutive ceramic shards, known as ostraca, upon which a solitary name had been incised. The procedure itself presented an elegant simplicity juxtaposed with an inherently frightening democratic power. Annually, contingent upon the Assembly's affirmative vote to conduct such a measure, a ballot for ostracism might transpire. Devoid of formal judicial proceedings, evidentiary presentations, or oratorical defenses, the process involved merely citizens inscribing the name of the individual they most desired to see exiled from Athens for the subsequent decade. This mechanism functioned akin to an inverted contest of public favor, wherein achieving the highest tally signified the forfeiture of one's entire life and standing. An observer might witness an aged potter depositing his ceramic fragment into a capacious urn. The ostracon felt coarse within his calloused hands, a remnant of a water vessel shattered merely the preceding week. Yet, in this moment, it had been transformed into an instrument of democratic will, a potent implement capable of obliterating a human existence without recourse to physical aggression. Upon its surface, he had meticulously incised the appellation Aristides. Aristides the Just, he was commonly known. However, it appeared that not all citizens concurred that his particular interpretation of justice warranted continued presence within the city-state. This particular interpretation of justice warrants careful consideration and continued examination. The meticulous process of counting unfolds with deliberate slowness. Civic officials painstakingly separate the ceramic fragments, grouping them by inscribed name into distinct piles upon the wooden tables erected in the bustling heart of the agora. A subtle, rhythmic clicking sound permeates the air as each successive shard is added to its designated heap. There is an unexpected serenity to this auditory backdrop, a peculiar symphony of democracy in action, even as it systematically dismantles an individual's existence, one fragile piece of clay at a time. A profound sense of humanity imbues the custom of utilizing fractured pottery for such a momentous civic function. These ostraca were not specially manufactured voting tokens. Rather, they represented the commonplace refuse of daily life. They comprised fragments of oil lamps that had illuminated countless evening meals, remnants of drinking cups that once held diluted wine at convivial symposia, and shards of storage jars that had previously safeguarded a family's vital winter grain provisions. Each humble piece bears the indelible marks of ordinary existence. Faint wine stains, telltale burn marks from hearth fires, and the smooth, worn patina acquired from the repeated touch of innumerable hands. An observer might discern a young man's momentary hesitation before he commits his shard to the ballot urn. His particular piece of pottery appears exceptionally refined, unmistakably originating from an expensive vessel, and the name etched upon its surface is rendered in elegant, practiced script. He is participating in the act of ostracizing a fellow citizen, yet he executes this political maneuver with evident care and exemplary penmanship. Even amidst actions of civic removal, the ancient Greeks demonstrably upheld a profound appreciation for aesthetic presentation. The individual who wins, or more accurately, suffers the loss in this specific instance of ostracism, is unequivocally Aristides. Upon the official announcement of the final tally, his mound of pottery fragments looms significantly higher than all the others. More than 6,000 pieces of broken clay, each one signifying a citizen's desire for his departure, accumulate. This decision was not predicated upon the commission of a crime, nor was it the result of any formal conviction. Instead, it arose simply because a sufficient number of people had grown weary of his continued presence within their polis. One might observe the throngs as intelligence disseminates through the winding thoroughfares of Athens. Aristides is granted a mere 10 days to gather his entire life and withdraw from the city. This brief window of 10 days must suffice for him to liquidate what assets he can, make arrangements for the safekeeping of his remaining property, and bid farewell to his kin and companions. While he is permitted to take a selection of personal belongings, his residences, his agricultural holdings, and all his commercial ventures must remain behind, either to be managed by others or to be divested. The singular brilliance and chilling cruelty of ostracism lay in its absolute capacity to expunge an individual from the public sphere. Aristides could not merely depart Athens and establish himself in a neighboring settlement. He was unequivocally barred from the entirety of the Attican region, an expanse covering hundreds of square miles of territory. Consequently, he would be compelled to commence anew in an utterly foreign locale, among strangers entirely unfamiliar with his reputation or his established connections. One might now traverse the residential quarter where Aristides makes his home, observing him as he embarks upon the somber undertaking of disassembling his life. Slaves and household staff busy themselves, hastily packing domestic articles into sturdy wooden crates. His wife stands vigil in the central courtyard, overseeing the meticulous wrapping of cherished possessions. Exquisitely painted vases, gleaming bronze mirrors, and delicate ivory combs. Her countenance is carefully composed, yet the unmistakable lines of strain are visible around her eyes. A particularly harsh aspect of ostracism lies in its predilection for targeting accomplished individuals. One does not expend precious votes on the obscure or inconsequential. The system was meticulously designed to prune the tall poppies, to remove those who had achieved excessive prominence, amassed undue power, or simply become too irksome to their fellow citizens. It represented democracy's unique method of enforcing a peculiar form of social equilibrium through compulsory banishment. The myriad pottery shards employed to cast votes against Aristides themselves narrate compelling stories. Archaeologists have unearthed hundreds of these ancient fragments, and within them, one can decipher a rich catalogue of daily existence. remnants of oil lamps that illuminated countless evening meals, pieces of drinking cups that once held diluted wine at convivial symposia, and portions of storage jars that had previously safeguarded a family's vital winter grain provisions. Furthermore, some of these shards exhibit clear indications of having been prepared in advance. It appears that professional politicians of the era engaged scribes to inscribe names upon hundreds of pottery pieces, which were then distributed to their adherents on the day of the voting. Thus, democracy, even in its ancient Athenian manifestation, was by no means immune to the influence of organized campaigning and political machinery. One might then observe oneself positioned within a pottery workshop, watching a skilled craftsman scrutinize the shards that voters had brought forth. From the specific clay composition, the precise firing technique, and the intricate glaze patterns, he can precisely identify which workshops produced each piece. "This one originates from Kerameikos," he declares, indicating a particular fragment. "And this one, observe the distinctive red slip. That hails from the potters situated near the Dippolon Gate." In this remarkable manner, the city's discarded refuse was transformed into the very raw material of its political processes. As the sun ascends to its zenith, one might ponder the profound contrast between this form of punishment and the brutal, crude violence of the bronze bull. Ostracism is characterized by its sophistication, its bloodless nature, and an almost gentle quality in its execution. There is no agonizing screaming, no overt physical pain, merely the quiet, methodical dismantling of a life, culminating in the long, solitary walk to the city gates, bearing only what one can manage in a few modest bundles. The psychological impact of such an ordeal must have been truly immense. One could contemplate Aristides' predicament, knowing with absolute certainty that more than 6,000 of his fellow citizens, individuals with whom he had celebrated festivals, served alongside in military campaigns, and encountered daily in the marketplace, had all meticulously inscribed his name upon pottery fragments and voted for his banishment. This decision was not rooted in any perceived malevolence on his part, but simply because they had grown weary of his presence. There exists a tale, likely apocryphal yet profoundly psychologically resonant, concerning an illiterate farmer who supposedly requested Aristides himself to write his own name upon a pottery shard. When Aristides inquired as to the farmer's reasoning, the man reputedly responded, "I am simply tired of constantly hearing him referred to as the just." It appears that even virtues, when perpetually highlighted, could eventually become a source of civic irritation. One might recline now in the cooling shade of the painted stoa, observing the city's ceaseless activity while, somewhere nearby, Aristides continues his arduous packing. Life, it seems, does not halt its relentless march for the exile of a single individual. The pottery workshops diligently continue their production of jars and cups. The olive groves persistently yield their distinctive silver-green fruit. The ships steadfastly convey grain from distant harbors. Athens, in its enduring vitality, will unquestionably persist without him. The truly captivating aspect of ostracism lies in its inherently temporary nature. Following a 10-year period, the exiled individual possessed the right to return, with all their civic privileges fully reinstated. It functioned more as a political suspension or time out than a definitive life sentence. Indeed, Some politicians who had undergone ostracism even returned to assume significant leadership roles once more. However, a decade is a substantial duration, sufficient time for children to mature, for political alliances to undergo profound shifts, and for the entire landscape of power to be fundamentally reshaped. As the evening draws near and the inaugural stars begin to gleam above the Acropolis, one might ponder the multitude of lives that were quietly shattered in this manner. While ancient historical accounts tend to concentrate on celebrated politicians like Aristides, ostracism possessed the potential to target anyone who achieved undue prominence. Affluent merchants who exhibited excessive ostentation, generals who secured an abundance of victories, or orators who spoke with too much captivating eloquence, all could conceivably find themselves confronted by those mounting piles of pottery shards. Ultimately, the system gradually fell into disuse, not primarily because of its perceived cruelty, but rather because it became increasingly ineffectual. Politicians astutely learned to manipulate its mechanisms, employing ostracism votes to strategically eliminate their rivals instead of genuinely safeguarding democratic principles. The very sophistication that initially lent it an air of civility also rendered it susceptible to calculated exploitation. Tonight, as one settles into slumber, one might contemplate how this subtle form of justice speaks to a profound and enduring aspect of human nature. Our inherent desire to remove individuals who cause us discomfort, not through brute force, but through a collective societal decision to simply cease their inclusion. In our contemporary epoch of social media and the pervasive phenomenon of cancel culture, there exists an eerily familiar resonance with the power of numerous voices coalescing to erase someone from the public sphere. It is a process enacted one vote, one click, one shard at a time. Having borne witness to the quiet, almost imperceptible erasure inherent in ostracism, one's attention might be directed towards a dramatically different form of punitive measure. This particular punishment unfolded directly within the vibrant, beating heart of Athens, in full view of all its citizens. The agora was far more than a mere marketplace. It functioned as a veritable theater of shame, where public humiliation was enacted daily, akin to a continuous civic drama that never concluded. One might observe oneself positioned near the central fountain, where the morning crowd reaches its densest point. Merchants meticulously arrange their wares on sturdy wooden tables. Customers engage in animated haggling over prices. Children playfully chase one another amidst the stalls. Yet, one's gaze is drawn irresistibly towards a wooden platform situated near the tholos, the distinctive circular edifice where the city's executive officials convene. Upon this platform stands a man whose identity is unfamiliar to the observer. But from the widespread pointing and hushed whispers among the populace, it becomes unequivocally clear that everyone else knows precisely who he is and the compelling reason for his conspicuous presence. His name is Lysander. Just 3 days prior, he was apprehended for manipulating his measurements within the bustling grain market. This was not outright theft, but rather the subtle employment of measures that were marginally undersized, thereby skimming a small, illicit profit from each individual transaction. In our contemporary world, such an infraction might typically incur a monetary fine. However, in ancient Athens, the collective wisdom had determined that shame served as a far more potent instructor than any financial penalty could ever be. Lysander is compelled to remain on this elevated platform from the first light of dawn until the setting of the sun. for 5 consecutive days. Around his neck, he wears a wooden placard that boldly proclaims his transgression in large, unequivocally clear letters. The sign itself is crafted with considerable artistic flair. Even public shame, it seems, adhered to certain aesthetic standards in Athens, featuring vibrant red lettering set against a stark white background, ensuring legibility from across the expansive agora. Its inscription reads, "I am Lysander, the grain seller who cheats his measures." The observer witnesses a constant stream of individuals converging upon the elevated platform throughout the early hours of the day. A segment of the onlookers openly mocks and derides the disgraced individual, while others express their profound disapproval through somber headshakes. A handful pause to deliver impassioned sermons on the cardinal virtues of probity and civic responsibility. Parents, eager to impart a moral lesson through vivid illustration, hoist their young offspring onto their shoulders, transforming the spectacle of public degradation into a pedagogical demonstration intended to instill ethical principles by showcasing the dire consequences of vice. The most salient aspect of this punitive measure is the profound manner in which it weaves the threads of ignominy directly into the intricate social tapestry of the urban center. Lysander is afforded no sanctuary from the repercussions of his transgression, nor can he entertain the illusion that his misdeed might be forgotten. Every patron frequenting the agora for their grain provisions will henceforth possess an intimate knowledge of his identity and the specifics of his offense. His countenance, once perhaps unremarkable, is now irrevocably destined to be etched into the collective consciousness of countless citizens as the very embodiment of perfidy. As the morning sun ascends higher, its intensity amplifies, and an observer notes beads of perspiration gathering on Lysander's brow. He is denied the solace of repose, prohibited from shielding his head from the relentless rays, and forbidden sustenance, save for fleeting intervals when a municipal dignitary offers him a meager draught of water. While this corporeal tribulation undeniably constitutes a component of his penance, it pales in significance when juxtaposed with the profound anguish of public scrutiny. His physical form endures hardship, yet it is his esteemed standing and personal renown that are being systematically obliterated with far greater finality. An observer's attention is drawn to a hushed conversation between 2 women, engrossed in inspecting ceramic wares at an adjacent market stall. His consort must be utterly disgraced, one remarks, articulating a pervasive sentiment. She will undoubtedly find it impossible to present herself at the communal fountain without enduring censure. The second woman concurs with a knowing inclination of her head. And his progeny, she further posits, conceive of the ordeal of attending scholastic lessons when the identity of your father as the dishonest purveyor of grain is universally recognized. The pervasive stain of ignominy permeates the entire familial unit, much like an insidious oil saturates a delicate fabric. This punitive methodology, reliant on public opprobrium, reveals a profound sagacity. Its efficacy is extraordinarily high, obviating the necessity for carceral institutions, the deployment of custodial personnel, or the intricate machinery of elaborate judicial processes. The transgressor is simply positioned in a conspicuous location, visible to all. Their particular offense is unequivocally identified, whereupon the formidable force of societal censure is permitted to exert its full influence. In this paradigm, The collective populace assumes the dual roles of both arbiter of justice and the instrument of its implementation. With the advance of the day, an observer discerns a distinct evolution in the multitude's comportment towards Lysander. The earlier hours had drawn forth a collection of inquisitive spectators and severe detractors. The assembly that gathers in the afternoon, however, comprises individuals who had prior acquaintance with him, predating his transgression, erstwhile clientele, residential neighbors, and professional collaborators. Their emotional responses are considerably more intricate, encompassing sentiments of profound disappointment, a measure of commiseration, palpable indignation, yet also an undeniable captivation at witnessing a familiar figure metamorphosed into a conspicuous emblem of malfeasance. An aged gentleman slowly approaches the elevated platform, fixing his gaze upon Lysander for an extended duration. At length, he articulates a query, his voice carrying sufficient volume to be distinctly heard by all within earshot. "For 15 years, Lysander, I procured my grain from your establishment. Your sire, I recall, was a man of unimpeachable integrity. What calamity has befallen you?" The poignant inquiry lingers in the ambient atmosphere, much like the ephemeral tendrils of incense smoke, and in response, Lysander's shoulders visibly slump further under the weight of his ignominy. The observer is particularly impressed by the deeply personal nature of this form of retribution, especially when juxtaposed with the detached, administrative effectiveness of ostracism. The latter, characterized by its anonymity, involved countless pottery fragments, devoid of any personal identification. Public humiliation, conversely, compels both the dispenser of justice and the recipient of the penalty to engage in direct, visual confrontation. Each individual citizen traversing the vicinity of the platform is thus drawn into the punitive mechanism, becoming an active participant in the collective act of generating and reinforcing shame. The latter part of the day ushers in a distinct category of visitor, fellow traders from the bustling agora, keen to unequivocally dissociate themselves from Lysander's egregious offense. They deliberately pause at the platform, making a conspicuous public proclamation of their own probity, ensuring that all present are aware of their scrupulous adherence to correct weights and measures and their unwavering commitment never to defraud their clientele. In this curious turn of events, Lysander's ignominy inadvertently serves as an advantageous platform for others to conspicuously broadcast their own moral rectitude. An observer's attention is drawn to a cluster of youthful males who appear to derive excessive amusement from the unfolding drama. They engage in jesting, playfully lobbing minuscule projectiles toward the platform, treating Lysander's profound abasement as a form of public diversion. An elder citizen, witnessing their impropriety, delivers a trenchant reprimand. This solemn occasion represents the administration of justice, not a theatrical performance. Exhibit due reverence for the established procedure, even if you possess no regard for the individual himself. The young men, momentarily subdued, retreat from the scene, visibly chastened, yet still betraying faint, lingering smiles. As the celestial orb commences its descent towards the occidental horizons, the observer's thoughts turn to the stark divergence in the perception of personal privacy between the denizens of antiquity and contemporary individuals. For the ancients, the domains of public existence and private life were not delineated by the same rigid demarcation lines that modern society meticulously upholds. One's reputation, one's intrinsic honor, and one's hierarchical position within the social order were, in essence, regarded as communal assets, inherently susceptible to collective scrutiny, communal adjudication, and communal enforcement. The Twilight Assembly, though diminished in numerical strength, exhibits a heightened intensity. These individuals have arrived with the express intention of observing Lysander, to bear witness to the tangible manifestation of justice. Some accompany their offspring, seeking to impart valuable ethical instruction, while others are propelled by a simple, morbid curiosity regarding the appearance of a man who has endured 10 continuous hours of public ignominy. Lysander's visage is now deeply flushed from prolonged insulation and exposure to the elements, and his voice, rendered raspy, betrays the strain of the scant utterances permitted to him in conversation with city functionaries. A lone woman draws near the elevated structure, bearing a modest pitcher of water and a morsel of bread. She is of middle age, impeccably attired, and her identity remains unknown to the observer. Directing her gaze upwards toward Lysander, she speaks in a subdued tone, yet her words carry profound weight. My own spouse, 2 decades past, committed a similar transgression, manipulating his measures. He, too, stood upon this very platform. Subsequent to that experience, he was transformed into the most scrupulous merchant in all of Athens. There remains a viable path toward a life of integrity, should you elect to pursue it. Having deposited the sustenance at the foot of the platform, she seamlessly dissolves back into the throng. This singular instance of unforeseen benevolence registers upon the observer with the refreshing impact of a cool zephyr on an oppressively warm day. Public abasement, it becomes evident, transcends the mere act of retribution. It concurrently embodies the latent potential for atonement and moral restoration. The very collective that orchestrates and inflicts such ignominy also possesses the inherent capacity for clemency, capable of permitting the disgraced individual to painstakingly reconstruct their standing through a sustained demonstration of exemplary conduct. The observer now occupies a seat upon the steps of the Stoa. As the vestiges of daylight recede from the heavens, Lysander will shortly be granted permission to descend from the platform, to rejoin his household and endeavor to find slumber. Notwithstanding the profound upheaval that has irrevocably altered his existence this day, he is destined to return on the morrow, and again on the subsequent day, until the mandated period of his 5-day public penance has been duly fulfilled. The bustling agora gradually depopulates as the various merchants meticulously gather their wares, and citizens wend their way homeward in anticipation of their evening repasts. Yet, the imposing platform persists, resolute and enduring, a stark testament to the multifaceted utility of this central public expanse, a vibrant commercial hub, a pivotal civic nexus, and a dramatic arena for the public enactment of punitive measures. It is conceivable that on the morrow, another individual might occupy that very spot, bearing a distinct placard and confronting an entirely dissimilar assemblage. As the observer makes preparations for departure, profound questions emerge regarding the enduring ramifications of such disciplinary practices. Does the imposition of public ignominy genuinely cultivate more exemplary citizens, or does it merely engender individuals who are more circumspect in their efforts to evade detection? Furthermore, what are the broader societal implications? What transformative effects does it exert upon a community when the concept of shame is so overtly displayed, so dramatically staged, and so intrinsically interwoven into the collective understanding of morality and transgression. As the twilight hours descend, and one begins to succumb to the embrace of slumber, one might invariably find oneself contemplating the visceral sensation of enduring such an ordeal. Standing exposed upon that elevated platform, subject to the unyielding scrutiny of every acquaintance, every familiar face, bearing the weight of one's errors like an ill-fitting costume in a dramatic production for which no audition was ever sought. Yet, in this contemplative moment, the platform of public opprobrium appears almost benign when contrasted with the severity of the punitive measure soon to be unveiled. This subsequent form of retribution entails the complete severance of the convicted individual, not merely from the public gaze, but from the very essence of civilized existence. The observer is now situated upon the rugged, craggy coastline of Gyaros, a diminutive and desolate island nestled within the azure expanse of the Aegean Sea, witnessing a vessel recede until it vanishes beyond the distant horizon. On the shore, a solitary figure remains, possessing naught but the garments upon his person and a meager collection of provisions. His appellation is Demetrios, a man who, in a former life, was esteemed as an honorable citizen of Athens. A mere 6 months prior, Demetrios faced conviction for the transgression of misappropriating funds from the sacred temple of Athena. While this offense did not warrant the ultimate penalty of capital punishment, its gravity was sufficient to necessitate a sanction considerably more stringent than mere public abasement. The judicial body, consequently, decreed a sentence of exile, not the transient political expatriation associated with ostracism, but an irrevocable banishment to one of the numerous minor islands that punctuate the Aegean Sea, strewn across its surface like randomly cast pebbles. Gyaros stands as an exemplar of the most unforgiving of all possible destinations for exiles. It spans approximately 6 miles in length and 2 miles in breadth, its terrain predominantly characterized by barren rock formations and sparse, hardy scrub vegetation. It offers no naturally protected anchorage and hosts no enduring human habitations. A handful of meager springs yield water that is decidedly brackish, imbued with the distinct tang of saline and mineral deposits. While the island supports a population of wild goats, various species of seabirds, and a modest abundance of fish in the encircling waters, little else exists to sustain human existence. The observer's gaze rests upon Demetrios as he meticulously scrutinizes his newly assigned domain. He is an individual perhaps in his 4th decade, accustomed to the manifold amenities of urban living, consistent nourishment, a commodious dwelling, the convenience of domestic staff for arduous tasks, and the solace of companionship and intellectual discourse from his associates. Now, however, he stands utterly isolated upon a shoreline of dark, volcanic sand, his ears attuned to the ceaseless rhythmic cadence of waves crashing against the stone, a sound destined to become his principal confidant for the remainder of his days. The vessel that conveyed him to this remote locale is scheduled to reappear in approximately a year, perhaps 2. Solely to ascertain his continued vitality and to deliver a bare minimum of provisions, a modest quantity of grain, some essential oil, and a handful of rudimentary implements. Crucially, there exists no assurance of eventual retrieval, no solemn pledge of a future reintegration into the embrace of civilization. Banishment to these desolate islands is inherently designed to be conclusive. a draconian method of expunging an individual from the societal fabric with such thoroughness that their existence is rendered virtually equivalent to demise, save for the fact that their actual passing is consigned to the caprice of fate and the limits of their own ingenuity. The observer tracks Demetrios's movements as he embarks upon the initial exploration of his novel environment. The island's interior proves to be even more formidable than its coastal fringes. A landscape dominated by craggy hills cloaked in impenetrable thorny shrubs, desiccated streambeds that might intermittently channel water during the ephemeral rainy season, and numerous caverns capable of offering rudimentary refuge, provided one is amenable to cohabiting with colonies of bats and any other indigenous fauna that may have previously asserted dominion over these subterranean sanctuaries. Whatever other creatures might have previously laid claim to them. The psychological ramifications of this particular brand of retribution likely far outweigh any physical hardships endured. Demetrios, much like the vast majority of humanity, was inherently a gregarious creature. His existence had been woven into the fabric of constant discourse, the comforting, predictable rhythms of urban life, and the reassuring knowledge that assistance was readily available should the need arise. Now he confronts an overwhelming silence, punctuated solely by the mournful whispers of the wind, the ceaseless murmur of the waves, and the occasional piercing cry of a solitary seabird. One observes him in his endeavor to ignite a flame using the meager provisions from his allocated bundle: a piece of flint, a steel striker, and a small quantity of dry tinder, meticulously safeguarded from the corrosive sea spray during the arduous sea journey. A faint tremor is discernible in his hands, not a consequence of the biting cold, but rather an involuntary reaction to the profound gravity of his predicament. This nascent fire is not merely intended for warmth or the preparation of food. It represents his inaugural act of establishing a semblance of civilization within a locale utterly devoid of such constructs. The sagacious ancient Greeks possessed a profound comprehension that banishment to these isolated islands constituted a form of demise, a social demise, a civic demise, indeed, the demise of every element that imbued life with significance. An individual condemned to Gyaros was thenceforth precluded from participating in vibrant festivals, denied the fundamental right to cast a vote in the democratic assembly, forbidden from witnessing captivating theatrical performances, and excluded from engaging in the profound philosophical discourses that enriched the intellectual tapestry of Athenian existence. They were, in essence, irrevocably severed from all that the Greeks deemed fundamentally human. As the sun ascends to its zenith, one cannot help but notice the mesmerizing way the light plays upon the expansive waters encircling the island. It possesses a raw, untamed beauty, a dazzling spectacle of cerulean and alabaster hues, alive with shimmering motion, yet it simultaneously functions as an formidable barrier. This vast expanse of water symbolizes countless leagues separating Demetrios from everything he once held dear, even if he possessed the capacity to construct a vessel, and the island offers scant resources for such an undertaking. The unpredictable currents and volatile weather patterns of the Aegean Sea pose an existential threat to any small craft. It is a known fact that some exiles succumbed to the torment of madness brought on by the relentless isolation. Others, remarkably, discovered a peculiar tranquility within the austere simplicity of mere survival. A select few even asserted that their banishment had been an unforeseen boon, liberating them from the trivial concerns and suffocating social pressures of city life. However, observing Demetrios in this moment, as he attempts to discern a suitable location for his inaugural night's shelter, one surmises that such philosophical acceptance remains a distant prospect in his future. One accompanies him to one of the island's sparse caves, a shallow concavity in the rocky terrain that providentially faces eastward, welcoming the nascent rays of the sunrise. It offers no semblance of comfort. The floor consists of jagged, uneven stone, and the ceiling is oppressively low, necessitating a stoop to navigate its confines. Yet, it provides a crucial sanctuary from the relentless onslaught of wind and rain. Crucially, it also offers a measure of defensibility, should the island's feral goats prove aggressive or if other unforeseen perils were to manifest. The meager bundle of provisions he transported from the ship contains the absolute minimum required for sustenance: a modest quantity of grain, some desiccated fish, a rudimentary water container, a sharp knife, a protective cloak, and a handful of other rudimentary implements. These supplies might conceivably sustain him for a few weeks, provided they are meticulously rationed. Beyond that initial period, his very existence will hinge entirely upon the island's capacity to provide and his ingenuity in procuring sustenance from the surrounding sea. One sits beside him as he partakes in his inaugural repast in exile, a diminutive portion of grain commingled with water, subtly flavored with a morsel of dried fish. It is undeniably meager, yet he consumes it with deliberate slowness, prolonging its meager sustenance. He is already internalizing one of the cardinal principles of survival. Every resource must be scrupulously conserved. Nothing can be squandered. Each decision concerning consumption is, in essence, a decision about the potential duration of his continued existence. As the afternoon gracefully transitions into evening, one becomes acutely aware of the profound stillness that envelops the island. There are no human sounds whatsoever, no conversational chatter, no clatter of cartwheels upon cobblestones, no rhythmic clang of hammers from bustling workshops, no melodious strains of music emanating from dwellings. The silence is so utterly pervasive that one can distinctly perceive the rhythmic thrum of one's own heart, the subtle cadence of one's own breath. For an individual accustomed to the incessant background symphony of urban life, this profound quietude must surely feel utterly overwhelming. Demetrios endeavors to occupy his troubled mind by meticulously formulating plans. He perambulates the immediate vicinity of the cave, gathering stones that might conceivably be employed to enhance the structural integrity of his rudimentary shelter. He scrutinizes the local flora, attempting to identify any plants that might be edible or possess other practical applications. He meticulously surveys the shoreline, seeking out the most propitious locations for fishing or the collection of shellfish. However, it is evident that his heart is not genuinely invested in these pragmatic endeavors. His thoughts persistently drift back to Athens, still grappling with the sheer magnitude of his profound losses. The initial night proves to be the most arduous. One observes from outside the cave, as Demetrios sits enshrouded in his cloak, his gaze fixed upon the diminutive fire he has painstakingly managed to sustain. Occasionally, he vocalizes his thoughts aloud, as if addressing an unseen interlocutor, perhaps his wife, or a cherished friend, or even his own conflicted self. The intrinsic human imperative for conversation is so potent that exile compels individuals to engage in imagined dialogues with phantom companions. As the days inexorably unfold, one witnesses the gradual metamorphosis that exile invariably engenders. Demetrios diligently establishes routines, meticulously tending to his small fire each morning, tirelessly foraging for sustenance, assiduously maintaining his shelter, and endeavoring to keep a precise reckoning of time by incising marks upon a piece of wood. These structured activities impart a semblance of order to his days, yet they also starkly underscore the profound disparity between this stark existence and the opulent, intricate social life he once knew. On certain days, he positions himself upon the island's loftiest promontory, his gaze sweeping across the vast expanse of water towards the distant horizon, where Athens lies imperceptible beyond the curvature of the earth. One can almost visualize him striving to conjure images of the events unfolding there. What political deliberations are consuming the assembly? What dramatic productions are captivating audiences in the theater? What profound philosophical discourses are unfolding within the hallowed halls of the gymnasia? He has, in essence, become a spectral presence, haunting the echoes of his own former life. The pervasive isolation also begins to visibly manifest in his physical appearance. His hair grows progressively longer and more unkempt. His garments become noticeably weathered and crudely patched. His skin acquires a deeper, sun-bronzed hue from constant exposure to the elements. Gradually, he begins to resemble less a refined Athenian citizen and more some enigmatic mythological figure, a reclusive hermit, a wild man, an individual existing on the outermost fringes of human society. Yet, amidst this harsh existence, there are also fleeting moments of unexpected beauty. One observes him as he stumbles upon a diminutive tide pool teeming with vibrant sea anemones and minuscule fish. He dedicates an entire hour simply observing their intricate movements, utterly captivated by this miniature, submerged realm. It is a profound sense of wonder that his bustling city life had never afforded him the opportunity to experience. As winter inexorably approaches, his inaugural winter in exile, one witnesses his meticulous preparations, executed with the methodical precision of an individual acutely aware that survival hinges upon an unwavering attention to detail. He diligently gathers dried seaweed for fuel, assiduously repairs and fortifies his precarious shelter, and strives to preserve whatever meager sustenance he can procure. The arduous labor keeps his hands occupied, but one can discern in his eyes the persistent, gnawing awareness that he is utterly alone in this painstaking preparation. Occasionally, he engages in conversations with the island's resident goats, addressing them as if they were long-lost companions. "Good morning, Socrates," he might intone to a particularly grizzled male goat. "What profound wisdom do you impart to me today?" It is a poignant and simultaneously heartbreaking spectacle, this desperate attempt to forge social interaction with creatures utterly incapable of providing any meaningful reciprocal response. The nights invariably remain the most agonizing period. One observes him lying within his cave, listening intently to the ceaseless symphony of wind and waves, his gaze fixed upon the myriad stars visible through the cave's entrance. He has, by now, committed all the constellations to memory, possesses the ability to forecast weather patterns based on cloud formations, and can accurately ascertain the time by tracking the moon's celestial trajectory. These newly acquired skills would undoubtedly have impressed his intellectual companions back in Athens. But here, there is no one present to be impressed. As one prepares to depart from this desolate island, one reflects on how banishment to these isolated insular outposts represents perhaps the most exquisitely cruel form of punishment ever devised by the ancient Greeks. Not because it involved overt violence, but precisely because of its profound and pervasive isolating nature. It stripped away not merely a person's freedom or material comforts, but their very fundamental humanity as intrinsically social beings. Whether Demetrios will ultimately survive, whether he will ever be rescued, whether he will somehow discover a semblance of peace amidst his profound isolation. These questions linger in the salty air like an ethereal morning mist, perpetually unanswered and perhaps ultimately unanswerable. Having borne witness to the utter desolation of island exile, one now finds oneself transported to an entirely different milieu, where punishment serves not merely as a punitive measure, but as a pedagogical instrument. One is standing within the hallowed confines of the gymnasium of ancient Athens, inhaling the distinctive commingled aromas of olive oil, human perspiration, and the rich scent of leather, stretched taut across wooden frames, drying under the benevolent afternoon sun. This esteemed institution is a sanctuary where nascent bodies are rigorously trained and burgeoning minds are meticulously molded, often through methodologies that would undeniably appear severe by contemporary standards. The gymnasium is far more than a mere venue for physical exertion. It constitutes a foundational pillar of Greek education, where young boys, typically between the ages of 12 and 18, devote their days to the arduous process of becoming exemplary citizens. Physical conditioning, musical instruction, mathematical principles, literary studies, and philosophical inquiry all converge within these walls, under the discerning tutelage of instructors who firmly believe that the rigorous discipline of the corporeal self and the astute discipline of the intellect are inextricably interwoven. One observes a group of 15-year-old boys diligently practicing the art of wrestling under the expert guidance of Philippos, a venerable former Olympic athlete whose hands, scarred from countless bouts and weather-beaten countenance, eloquently attest to decades of intense competitive combat. The boys are unclad, their youthful bodies glistening with olive oil, which is purportedly applied to protect their delicate skin during the rigors of grappling, yet also renders them considerably more challenging to grasp. It is a pragmatic application of fundamental physics that would undoubtedly elicit a nod of approval from even the brilliant Archimedes himself. Of physics that would undoubtedly impress Archimedes himself. One particular young man, whose name is Nicias, is experiencing considerable difficulty in mastering a specific throwing technique. He has attempted the maneuver no fewer than 6 times, and on each occasion, his opponent has effortlessly countered his move, resulting in Nicias being unceremoniously thrown to the ground. A palpable sense of frustration visibly mounts on the young man's countenance, a sentiment apparently observed by Philippos, who promptly halts the rigorous exercise. "Nicias," the instructor declares, his voice resonating with an authoritative timbre that effortlessly traverses the expansive gymnasium. "You are allowing your indignation to dictate your actions rather than engaging your intellect. When you permit raw emotion to govern your physical movements, you inevitably become predictable. Your adversary can discern your intentions long before you even initiate your motion. This pointed lecture is abruptly punctuated by the distinct whistle of displaced air and the sharp, percussive crack of leather impacting flesh. The whip wielded by Philippos is not designed to inflict grievous injury. It is a slender strip of leather affixed to a wooden handle, crafted to deliver a stinging sensation rather than a lacerating wound. Nevertheless, its psychological resonance is profound. Every boy within the gymnasium immediately ceases his current activity, compelled to listen intently upon hearing that unmistakable sound. It serves as a stark reminder that the pursuit of excellence demands unwavering discipline, and such discipline, on occasion, necessitates a degree of physical discomfort. One's attention is then drawn to Nicias as he relocates to an alternative section of the gymnasium, where other boys are meticulously practicing the art of discus throwing. A crimson welt is visible on his shoulder, a testament to the recent application of the whip, yet he exhibits no discernible anger regarding it. If anything, he appears more singularly focused than he had been during the preceding wrestling instruction. The acute sting of the chastisement has, in a remarkable manner, sharpened his concentration in a way that mere verbal instruction alone proved incapable of achieving. The designated area for discus throwing is clearly delineated by sturdy wooden posts, strategically driven into the earth at precisely measured intervals, thereby creating a distinctive fan-shaped throwing field. Boys take their turns launching the substantial bronze discs, their individual techniques meticulously scrutinized by Aristocles, an aged instructor whose own competitive throwing days are now firmly relegated to the past, yet whose discerning eye for impeccable form remains remarkably keen. He too carries a whip, although his is noticeably shorter and lighter than the one employed by Philippos for wrestling instruction. One observes a young man named Cleomenes as he steps forward to execute a throw. It is immediately apparent that he is a novice to this particular technique. His posture is incorrect. His grip upon the discus is tentative and uncertain, and upon its release, the disc veers wildly off its intended trajectory, narrowly missing a cluster of boys engaged in javelin practice nearby. Aristocles slowly shakes his head and motions for Cleomenes to approach him. "Before you attempt to throw another discus," the instructor states in a hushed tone, "you must first grasp a fundamental principle concerning precision. Extend your hand." Cleomenes dutifully extends his right hand, palm upward, and Aristocles brings his whip down across it twice, not with sufficient force to break the skin, but with enough impact to cause the boy's eyes to well up with tears. Now you will recall the importance of contemplating your designated target before you release the implement. Pain, it must be understood, serves as an exceptionally effective tutor in the art of attention. The other boys witness this corrective measure without exhibiting any apparent shock or overt sympathy. Physical discipline is regarded as an integral component of gymnasium education, no less essential than learning to compute intricate geometric proportions or committing lengthy passages from Homer to memory. They comprehend that their instructors are not acting out of malice or cruelty. Rather, they are assiduously preparing these young men for lives in which a deficit of discipline could potentially lead to grave consequences. One then moves to the section where older boys, aged 17 and 18 years, are diligently practicing pankration, a formidable form of combat that seamlessly integrates both wrestling and striking techniques. This is indeed a serious undertaking. Some of these young men will soon attain the status of full citizens, complete with military obligations, and the formidable skills they acquire within these walls may well determine their survival in future armed conflicts. The instructor presiding over this area is Lycophron, a seasoned former soldier who tragically lost 2 fingers in a brutal battle against the Persians 2 decades prior. His pedagogical approach is markedly more intense than what was observed with the younger boys. When a student commits an error that, in the context of actual combat, could prove fatal, Lycophron exhibits no hesitation in utilizing his whip to unequivocally drive the critical lesson home. One observes 2 boys, Alexios and Damon, engaged in a sparring session under Lycophron's vigilant supervision. Alexios attempts a complex leg sweep, but, in the execution, inadvertently leaves his guard dangerously exposed. Damon, instead of exploiting this clear opening, hesitates, perhaps out of a sense of camaraderie, or perhaps due to a momentary absence of a predatory instinct. Lycophron immediately calls a halt to the match. "Damon," he pronounces, his voice sharp with urgency, "in the crucible of battle, hesitation is a harbinger of death. Your friend's misstep presented an invaluable opportunity, and you conspicuously failed to seize it." The whip cracks sharply across Damon's back, and Alexios, your elaborate techniques are utterly worthless if they render you vulnerable. You would be dead now if Damon had been thinking with the mindset of a warrior instead of a mere boy. The whip also finds its mark on Alexios, but this immediate physical correction is swiftly followed by comprehensive and detailed instruction. Lycophron meticulously demonstrates to both boys precisely what actions they should have taken, how Alexios could have maintained an impenetrable guard throughout the sweep, and how Damon could have effectively capitalized on his opponent's critical error. The whip delivers its stinging reprimand, but the profound knowledge that immediately follows serves to ensure that such a mistake will not be reiterated. It becomes apparent that the application of the whip varies considerably depending on the individual instructor and the specific nature of the transgression. Philippos, in his role as wrestling instructor, employs it primarily to rectify issues of attitude and focus. Aristocles, guiding the discus throwers, utilizes it to reinforce crucial lessons concerning precision and safety protocols. Lycophron, on the other hand, applies it with utmost gravity when mistakes could directly translate into fatalities on the battlefield. Each instructor has evidently cultivated his own distinct philosophy regarding the judicious necessity of physical discipline. The gymnasium also encompasses dedicated areas for intellectual instruction, and one's curiosity is piqued as to whether the whip holds any place within those particular lessons. One follows a group of boys to a sheltered portico where they are seated on simple wooden benches before an instructor named Hermippos, who is guiding them through intricate geometric proofs using diagrams meticulously drawn in the sand. The mathematical lesson initially progresses in a tranquil manner, with boys taking turns explaining various sequential steps in the proof. However, when a student named Thrasymachus provides an incorrect answer and subsequently argues obstinately with the instructor instead of acknowledging his undeniable error, Hermippos reaches for a light rod rather than his customary whip. "Thrasymachus," he states with a remarkable degree of patience, "mathematics is entirely impervious to your personal opinion or your ego. The proof either functions correctly or it does not, and to engage in arguments with objective reality is merely to squander everyone's precious time." He strikes the boy's hand with the rod, not with severe force, but sufficiently to convey the intended message. Now examine the diagram once more and articulate precisely where your reasoning went astray. The correction proves effective. Thrasymachus diligently studies the geometric figures intricately etched in the sand, meticulously traces the complex relationships between their various elements, and eventually identifies his fundamental error. The brief, sharp sting of the rod had effectively helped him to set aside his personal pride and to concentrate solely on the actual problem at hand. Physical discipline, when applied with sagacious judgment, had undeniably served the noble cause of learning. As the afternoon gradually progresses, one observes how the diverse manifestations of discipline cultivate distinct atmospheric qualities in different sections of the gymnasium. The wrestling area pulsates with an intense energy, born from the understanding that substandard technique will be immediately and physically corrected. The mathematical instruction area, in contrast, possesses a thoughtful and contemplative ambiance, where students adeptly balance intellectual exploration with a keen awareness that stubborn errors carry palpable consequences. One settles onto a cool stone bench situated near the gymnasium's central courtyard, observing the sun's descending angle as it casts long shadows through the majestic tall columns. The boys are concluding their lessons for the day, diligently cleansing themselves with strigils, curved metal scrapers designed to remove oil, sweat, and accumulated dust from their skin. Some bear faint, lingering red marks from the day's various corrections, yet their conversations are animated and conspicuously cheerful. What most profoundly impresses one about this entire pedagogical system is the utterly complete manner in which physical discipline is integrated into the holistic educational process. The whip and rod are not employed as instruments of punishment in the sense of retribution or cruelty. Rather, they are regarded as essential tools for teaching, meticulously designed to forge immediate, indelible associations between mistakes and their inherent consequences. The boys appear to accept this as an entirely natural component of their learning journey, no more objectionable than the necessity of memorizing epic poetry or diligently practicing musical scales. One of the older boys, preparing to depart from the gymnasium, pauses to meticulously wrap a small cloth around a distinct welt on his forearm. His companion inquires about it, and the boy merely shrugs nonchalantly. Lycophron reminded me of the imperative to maintain my guard during knife defense practice. I shall not make that particular mistake again. There is not a trace of resentment in his voice, merely the matter-of-fact acceptance of an individual who fully comprehends that the path to true learning sometimes entails a degree of physical discomfort. As evening draws near and the gymnasium gradually empties, one reflects upon the stark contrast between this approach to education and what might be anticipated in contemporary times. The ancient Greek conviction that physical discipline possessed the power to fortify character and enhance learning may appear harsh to modern sensibilities, but it was firmly rooted in their profound belief that the mind and body constituted inseparable components of comprehensive human development. The instructors, notwithstanding their consistent use of whips and rods, undeniably demonstrate a deep and genuine concern for the welfare of their students. This care is evident in the meticulous manner in which they follow every correction with detailed instruction, in their willingness to personally demonstrate complex techniques, and in their attentive consideration of each boy's individual strengths and inherent weaknesses. The physical discipline, in this context, is inextricably embedded within relationships characterized by authentic mentorship. A life truly lived is often found deeply embedded in relationships characterized by genuine mentorship. As the quiet of the evening descends, one might pause to contemplate the intricate interplay between the acquisition of knowledge and the experience of discomfort. The ancient Hellenes held a profound conviction that both the physical form and the intellectual faculties necessitated rigorous engagement, propelled beyond familiar boundaries, to achieve their full potential, regardless of whether this philosophical tenet was ultimately judicious or misguided. Its pervasive influence undeniably shaped a generation of citizens who embraced strict discipline and displayed an unwavering commitment to unparalleled excellence in both physical prowess and intellectual endeavors. Having recently observed the stark, resounding crack of whips within the confines of a bustling gymnasium, one now finds themselves transported to a setting where ultimate retribution manifests, yet paradoxically, in the most subdued manner conceivable. The scene unfolds within a modest, stone-walled chamber of the state prison in Athens, on a warm afternoon in 399 BC. Here, the most celebrated execution in the annals of Western philosophy quietly transpires, devoid of dramatic spectacle or overt violence, instead unfolding through the gentle cadence of conversation and profound intellectual curiosity. Socrates, then a venerable 70 years of age, stands on the precipice of consuming a draught of poisonous hemlock. His fate was sealed by an Athenian jury's conviction on charges of impiety and the corruption of the city's youth. These accusations, as numerous observers have noted, possessed a certain elusive ambiguity, yet the prescribed penalty was starkly unequivocal. Death by hemlock. This was the established protocol for executing citizens deemed unworthy of the more honorable demise typically afforded to those who fell bravely in battle. The atmosphere within the chamber was remarkably tranquil, an unexpected serenity for a place destined to witness a man's final moments. The gentle rays of the afternoon sun streamed through a small, elevated window, illuminating countless dust motes that danced idly in the air. Socrates himself sat calmly upon a simple wooden bench, encircled by a devoted coterie of friends and students who had gathered to share his concluding hours. Their countenances bore the unmistakable imprint of sorrow, yet intermingled with it was a peculiar sort of fascination. They were, without question, experiencing a moment utterly unprecedented in their lives. What rendered this particular execution so profoundly exceptional was not the chosen method. Indeed, countless Athenians had previously succumbed to the effects of hemlock. Rather, its singular nature stemmed entirely from the extraordinary composure and demeanor of the condemned man himself. Socrates appeared almost eager to partake of the poison, not out of a desire for death, but from an irrepressible, genuine curiosity regarding what lay beyond the veil of life. For him, death represented the ultimate uncharted territory, and such profound unknowns had, throughout his distinguished life, consistently been his most cherished subjects for rigorous intellectual investigation. One observes the executioner, a man of quiet disposition and professional bearing, who regarded his grim task as a specialized craft, demanding both precision and extensive knowledge, as he meticulously prepared the hemlock draught. Having performed this duty on numerous prior occasions, he possessed an exact understanding of the precise quantity of the ground plant to blend with wine, ensuring the concoction was sufficiently potent to act swiftly, yet carefully calibrated to avert any superfluous suffering. From a botanical standpoint, the hemlock plant itself presents an intriguing subject. Its visual characteristics bear a deceptive resemblance to parsley, a similarity that has tragically led to numerous accidental poisonings throughout the centuries. However, its physiological effects are profoundly distinct. The active chemical compounds, predominantly choline, exert their influence by progressively incapacitating the nervous system, commencing with the body's extremities and systematically advancing inward towards the vital internal organs. The final cessation of life occurs when this paralyzing effect ultimately reaches and disables the lungs and diaphragm, rendering respiration impossible. Socrates, demonstrating the same profound intellectual curiosity he would typically apply to a discourse on complex mathematics or intricate ethical dilemmas, directly questioned the executioner about the process. "How long does it usually take?" he calmly inquired. "Will I remain conscious throughout? Is there pain involved?" The executioner, perhaps taken aback by such clinical interest from an individual facing imminent death, responded to each query with thoroughness and unwavering professionalism. Most individuals begin to experience a loss of sensation in their feet within a few minutes, the executioner elucidated, his hands steadily stirring the mixture. The numbness then gradually ascends the body. You should retain your awareness until very near the end, but there is seldom any significant pain. It is more a sensation of growing coldness and increasing bodily weight. Some men even drift into slumber before the final moment arrives. The discourse within the chamber continued, maintaining an atmosphere more akin to an ordinary social gathering than a solemn execution. Socrates engaged in profound philosophical discussions with his companions, posing intricate questions concerning the fundamental essence of the soul. He speculated openly about whether death constituted a profound, dreamless slumber or a transformative journey to a realm where he might at last converse with the great intellectual luminaries of antiquity. His insatiable curiosity regarding the nature of death demonstrably superseded any apprehension he might otherwise have felt. One cannot help but notice the executioner's conduct throughout his role. He exhibited no cruelty or vindictiveness. He was simply a skilled artisan performing his designated duty. He meticulously measured the hemlock, carefully assessed the mixture's consistency, and ensured every aspect of the preparation was executed with precision. There was an undeniable professional dignity in his every movement, as if he possessed an intrinsic understanding that the manner in which an individual departs life holds profound significance, even when that individual has been condemned by the authority of the state. When the appointed moment arrived for Socrates to consume the poison, he accepted the cup without the slightest hesitation. His friends, though silently weeping, observed his remarkably composed demeanor. "Gentlemen," he declared, casting his gaze around the assembled company, "I have dedicated my entire existence to rigorously examining the fundamental question of how one ought to live well. Now, I am afforded the singular opportunity to examine how one might die well. This, I believe, is simply the next logical progression in my lifelong investigation." The hemlock concoction possessed a distinctly bitter flavor, a characteristic upon which Socrates commented with the same analytical precision he might apply to discerning the nuances of a new vintage of wine. He consumed the entire contents, returned the empty cup to the executioner, and then commenced pacing the confines of the small room, concurrently verbalizing the sensations he was experiencing. It was as if he were conducting a meticulous medical experiment upon his own person, providing a continuous, live commentary for the benefit of his attentive observers. "My feet are growing cold," he reported after a few minutes had elapsed, "and they feel heavy, as if they no longer belong to me." He continued his measured pacing until the spreading sensation reached his calves, at which point he calmly seated himself upon the bench and extended his legs. The executioner, with professional diligence, periodically tested Socrates' reflexes by gently pinching his feet and legs, systematically charting the progression of the paralysis. The truly extraordinary aspect of this execution lay in its profound educational transformation. Socrates, in his final moments, transmuted his own death into a powerful lesson in courage, intellectual curiosity, and the appropriate philosophical disposition towards the ultimate unknown. His friends, initially overwhelmed by profound grief, found themselves inexorably drawn into this unique philosophical exploration of the dying process. The prison chamber thus became, in effect, an impromptu classroom where the most ultimate subject matter was being investigated in real time, before their very eyes. As the paralysis continued its inexorable ascent, reaching his thighs and subsequently his abdomen, Socrates' voice retained its clarity and his intellect remained remarkably incisive. He persisted in posing questions about the precise physical sensations he was experiencing, delving into the profound philosophical implications of consciousness, gradually withdrawing from the corporeal form, and inquiring whether his friends could derive any useful insights from witnessing this unfolding process. The executioner, a man who had undoubtedly overseen hundreds of hemlock-induced deaths throughout his career, appeared visibly impressed by Socrates' unwavering composure and profound intellectual engagement with the experience. "Most men spend their final moments consumed by fear or regret," he remarked quietly to one of Socrates' companions. "This man approaches dying as if it were merely another mathematical problem to be solved. It is truly an unusual phenomenon." One observes as Socrates' respiration grew increasingly labored. The paralysis was now undeniably encroaching upon his chest, yet his mind continued to function with remarkable acuity. He recounted a dream he had experienced the previous night, in which a woman of great beauty had assured him that he would reach the fertile shore within 3 days, a clear allusion to a line from Homer, which Socrates interpreted as signifying his imminent arrival at whatever destination awaited the deceased. The afternoon light was now noticeably waning, casting elongated, deepening shadows across the cold stone floor. Socrates then requested that his friend Crito remember to offer a sacrifice of a rooster to Asclepius, the revered god of healing. It was a peculiar final injunction. Perhaps he meant to convey that death itself represented a form of healing, a definitive cure for the inherent maladies of life. Or conceivably, he was delivering a private jest, the full meaning of which was comprehensible only to him. As his breathing became progressively more difficult, Socrates gently drew a cloth over his face. Yet, a brief moment later, he uncovered it once more to deliver a final, singular observation. "Crito, I believe my feet are truly cold now. Is this, then, what the very end feels like?" These were his ultimate words, articulated not as a dramatic, climactic pronouncement, but rather as one more piece of empirical data in his lifelong, relentless investigation into the entirety of human experience. The executioner meticulously checked for any signs of breathing, for a pulse, for any lingering trace of life. Discovering none, he gently closed Socrates' eyes and respectfully arranged his body upon the bench. The greatest questioner had at last encountered a question he could no longer articulate, though perhaps, in that very moment, he had also finally discovered the ultimate answer that had eluded him throughout his 70 years of profound inquiry. A profound silence descended upon the chamber, broken only by the subdued, quiet weeping of his devoted friends. Yet even amidst their palpable grief, there permeated a distinct sense that they had collectively borne witness to something truly extraordinary. Not merely a physical death, but a powerful, living demonstration of how a life dedicated to philosophy might conclude, exhibiting the very same intellectual courage and unwavering spirit it had displayed throughout its remarkable duration. Socrates had, in essence, transformed his own execution into his final and perhaps his most impactful lesson. As one remains seated in the gathering gloom of the prison cell, contemplation turns to the profound contrast between this execution and the more theatrical public punishments one might have observed elsewhere. There were no clamoring crowds, no sensational spectacle, no deliberate attempts to humiliate or instill terror. Only a quiet, unassuming room where a man confronted his own mortality with an unyielding intellectual curiosity, thereby transforming his final moments into a profound investigation of life's ultimate mystery. The hemlock had now completed its inexorable work entirely. Socrates lay utterly still upon the bench, his repose so peaceful that he appeared almost to be in a deep slumber rather than truly deceased. His friends, with heavy hearts, began to prepare to transport his body home for burial. Yet their movements were slow, almost hesitant, as if reluctant to bring an end to this final, sacred gathering with their revered teacher. They had absorbed an invaluable lesson on this day, a lesson about indomitable courage, about the fundamental nature of death, and about the profound possibility of facing the deepest unknown with intellectual excitement rather than paralyzing fear. As evening descends and tranquility settles, one might contemplate the peculiar clemency embodied by hemlock as a means of execution. It permitted Socrates to retain his essential being, to persist in profound thought, imparting wisdom and ceaselessly questioning until his final breath. In an era where punitive measures frequently devolved into public spectacles of degradation, the city-state of Athens afforded its citizenry a dignified departure, preserving their honor even in their ultimate moments. Following the observation of Socrates' serene and dignified departure, the scene dramatically shifts to an entirely different milieu, where punitive actions were dictated by the pressing imperatives of maritime survival. The observer now stands upon the deck of a Hellenic trireme, sensing the vessel's rhythmic ascent and descent amidst the Mediterranean swells, and hearing the synchronized cadence of 170 oars slicing through the water with impeccable coordination. Here, discipline transcended mere notions of justice or intellectual edification. It was fundamentally about safeguarding every individual's existence within one of the ancient world's most perilous occupational environments. This trireme represents a veritable triumph of engineering. Stretching nearly 120 feet in length, yet a mere 18 feet in width, it was meticulously crafted for blistering speed and potent ramming capabilities rather than creature comforts. 3 distinct tiers of oarsmen occupy sturdy wooden benches, each individual wholly responsible for a single oar, which absolutely must move in flawless concert with his fellow crew members. Any slight miscalculation in timing possesses the potential to disrupt the entire vessel's vital rhythm, thereby threatening to incapacitate it critically during the throes of a naval engagement or a violent tempest. The observer witnesses the ship's commander, a seasoned and weather-beaten veteran named Xenophon, distinct from the celebrated historian, though, sharing the same appellation, confronting a critical issue that compromises the vessel's operational efficacy. One of the oarsmen, a man identified as Bias, indulged in excessive consumption of alcohol during his night watch duties, and is now utterly incapable of maintaining the requisite synchronization with his oar. His erratic and uncoordinated rowing profoundly impacts the entire port side of the formidable warship. On a Greek warship, naval discipline is characterized by its immediacy and public nature. Xenophon does not convene a formal judicial proceeding or engage in protracted deliberations concerning an appropriate penalty. He simply issues an unhesitating command for Bias to be bound to the main mast. There, the errant oarsman is destined to remain for the entirety of the day, serving as a stark admonition to the other rowers. With swift efficiency, 2 sailors secure the man's wrists with robust rope, fastening him firmly to the towering wooden spar that supports the ship's expansive square sail. While the punishment might appear straightforward in its execution, its repercussions are far-reaching and multifaceted. Bias finds no respite from the relentless sun, which beats down mercilessly upon the exposed deck, casting an intense, oppressive heat. He is afforded no opportunity to sit or recline. The taut ropes hold him rigidly upright against the mast's unyielding surface. Crucially, he is prevented from participating in the collective labor that imbues shipboard existence with both purpose and a vital rhythm. Perhaps most impactful, he cannot escape the palpable disapproval, the direct gazes, and the hushed comments of his shipmates, who keenly grasp that his lapse in discipline jeopardizes the safety and survival of every soul aboard. The observer notes with particular interest the collective reaction of the other rowers to the sight of their crewmate immobilized against the mast. Their individual oar strokes visibly gain in precision. Their responsiveness to commands becomes markedly more instantaneous. The very act of witnessing punishment being meted out powerfully reinforces the fundamental understanding that individual transgressions carry profound collective ramifications when at sea. In a scenario where a ship might be compelled to outpace marauding pirates or deliver a decisive ramming blow to an enemy vessel, there simply exists no margin for the kind of casual disregard for rules that might conceivably be overlooked on solid ground. As the morning hours advance, the physical toll of the mast punishment on Bias becomes increasingly evident to the observer. The sun's intense rays reflect off the shimmering water and the gleaming white sail, generating a blinding glare that forces him to squint and repeatedly avert his gaze. The coarse rope encircling his wrists begins to chafe and cut into his skin with every futile attempt he makes to shift his position. His legs, held immobile and unable to flex or move freely, gradually succumb to agonizing cramps from the prolonged, unyielding posture maintained for hours on end. Yet the psychological torment likely surpasses the physical discomfort. Bias is compelled to watch his own rowing bench remain conspicuously vacant while his shipmates diligently perform their duties. He can plainly perceive how his forced absence detrimentally affects the vessel's overall operational capacity. The port side now operates with 56 oarsmen instead of its full complement of 57, introducing a subtle yet discernible imbalance in the ship's smooth progression through the water. His punishment is not merely a personal ordeal. It serves as a relentless, constant reminder of his failure to uphold his duty to his shipmates. The ship's established routine unfolds ceaselessly around the bound man. Rowers take their designated breaks, rotating in organized shifts to allow their arms and backs a measure of rest. The seasoned sailing master meticulously adjusts the rigging to harness the shifting winds with optimal efficiency. The helmsman executes subtle, precise corrections to maintain the vessel's unwavering course. Bias, however, remains utterly motionless against the mast, a stark, living embodiment of the severe repercussions when an individual breaches the strict discipline essential for a warship's effective functioning. Moving closer, the observer strains to discern the hushed conversations among the crew. Some voices express a measure of sympathy for Bias. They themselves have all experienced the temptation to overindulge during the protracted stretches of long voyages, and they comprehend the profound boredom and cumulative stress that can precipitate poor judgment. Others, however, are decidedly less forgiving, emphasizing that naval engagements are frequently decided by margins measured in mere seconds, and consequently, every single rower must be unequivocally dependable when the ship demands its utmost speed. An aged sailor named Cleander, a veteran who had dedicated 2 decades to service on triremes, elucidates the underlying philosophy of mast punishment to a younger crew member. On land, a man's missteps primarily inflict harm upon himself, he states, his gaze fixed as he meticulously checks the tension of a rope. At sea, however, the failure of one individual can imperil the entire vessel. The mast imparts that crucial lesson with far greater efficacy than any spoken admonition. As the sun ascends to its zenith, the ship's deck becomes unbearably hot. The bronze fittings, exposed to the intense rays, become scorching to the touch, compelling even the most seasoned sailors to seek out any fleeting patch of shade. Bias, bound upright against the mast, finds no refuge from the oppressive heat. Sweat streams down his face and thoroughly saturates his tunic, yet he is denied water, save for the meager quantities Xenophon grudgingly permits. This ration is precisely enough to avert death, but wholly insufficient to alleviate the discomfort of his ordeal. The observer discerns that the punishment is meticulously calibrated. Xenophon periodically checks on Bias, roughly every hour, ensuring his life is not in immediate peril, while simultaneously confirming the deterrent lesson remains powerfully effective. Indeed, if the punitive measure were deemed too lenient, it would fail to adequately discourage future transgressions. Conversely, if it proved excessively harsh, it risked inflicting permanent damage upon a valuable crew member, an individual who would undeniably be essential when the vessel inevitably confronted genuine emergencies at sea. The afternoon ushers in an abrupt squall, characterized by ominous dark clouds and a deluge of driving rain, which severely tests the crew's collective skill and unwavering teamwork. The oarsmen are compelled to dramatically increase their stroke rate to maintain forward momentum against the formidable wind and surging waves. The sailing master and his assistants struggle intensely to reef the expansive sail before it succumbs to the tearing force of the gale. Every man aboard the vessel is engrossed in urgent, vital work, with the sole exception of Bias, who can only observe from his fixed position against the mast, as his shipmates valiantly battle the tempest without his aid. The profound isolation inherent in massed punishment becomes most acutely apparent during critical emergencies such as this. While every other individual actively contributes to the ship's arduous struggle for survival, the bound man is reduced to a helpless, passive witness to his own fate. Should the vessel founder in the raging storm, he would undoubtedly drown alongside everyone else. Yet, he has been deliberately prevented from offering any assistance to avert that very outcome. This particular punishment compels him to directly confront his fundamental dependence upon the very crew he consciously let down through his egregious misconduct. As the squall eventually abates and the ship resumes its normal course, the observer faintly overhears Bias murmuring quietly to himself. These utterances include fervent prayers to Poseidon for the ship's continued safety, hushed apologies directed at crewmates who are too distant to hear, and solemn promises to exhibit better conduct should he be granted another opportunity. This period of intense isolation has evidently afforded him ample time to deeply reflect upon his actions and their far-reaching consequences in a manner that immediate physical reprisal alone might not have achieved. The ship's cook, a pragmatic individual named Demetrius, conscientiously reserves a portion of the evening meal for Bias. It is not a generous serving, but precisely enough to sustain his life. The food is cold and comprises the least palatable items from the communal pot, yet it represents a grudging form of care for a crew member who, despite his punishment, remains an integral part of the ship's closely knit community. As dusk settles and the Mediterranean sky transforms into a breathtaking palette of purple and orange hues, Xenophon finally issues the command for Bias to be released from the mast. The man's legs can barely support his weight after enduring an entire day in an unyielding, upright posture, and his wrists bear raw, chafed marks from the constricting rope. Nevertheless, he is alive, fully conscious, and outwardly appears to be reformed, at least for the immediate future. The ceremony of untying is notably brief and devoid of any formal speeches. Two sailors swiftly sever the ropes, then assist Bias in his unsteady walk back to his bench, offering him a water jar from which he sips slowly. The other rowers observe this process with keen interest, yet offer neither overt sympathy nor congratulations. The punishment has concluded, but Bias will be expected to demonstrate through his subsequent behavior that he has genuinely internalized its stern lessons. The observer notes that Bias's immediate reintegration into his normal duties is not forthcoming. He is granted the remainder of the evening for recovery, but by the following morning, he will be back at his oar, expected to maintain the same precise timing and unwavering discipline as every other rower. The physical punishment itself was temporary, yet its profound impact on his reputation and his relationships within the crew will undoubtedly linger for a considerably longer duration. As the ship settles into its nocturnal rhythm, anchor securely dropped, watches meticulously assigned, cooking fires carefully contained, the observer reflects upon the distinct ways in which naval punishment diverges from other forms of justice previously witnessed. It is inherently immediate, eminently practical, and singularly focused on upholding the rigorous discipline indispensable for survival. There is simply no latitude for philosophical contemplation or elaborate ceremonial rites when human lives are unequivocally dependent upon instantaneous obedience and flawless coordination. Above, the stars emerge, their brilliant points mirrored in the dark waters surrounding the vessel. Bias sleeps soundly on his bench, likely experiencing true rest for the first time in 24 hours. His punishment has run its course, yet its profound repercussions will undeniably ripple through the crew's intricate dynamics for many weeks to come. Every future instance of potential indiscipline will inevitably be weighed against the indelible memory of a man bound to the mast beneath the merciless glare of the sun. A lone figure bound to a ship's mast endured the relentless sun. As one might seek repose amidst the gentle undulations of a vessel, the profound strictures of maritime existence often compelled unique forms of punitive justice. In a realm where avenues of escape are non-existent, where concealment is an impossibility, and where the collective survival hinges entirely upon impeccable cooperation, chastisement transcends mere retaliation. It transforms into an indispensable pedagogical instrument, imparting the most elemental lesson of naval discipline. The prosperity or peril of the crew is inextricably linked. Having observed the intensely personal chastisement of a man secured to a ship's mast, the observer then found himself transported to the most magnificent theatrical venue of the ancient world, not for the purpose of enjoying a dramatic performance, but rather to witness a punitive act orchestrated as a grand public spectacle. One was seated upon the venerable stone benches of the Theatre of Dionysus in Athens, gazing down into a capacious circular orchestra where the machinery of justice was poised to unfold, before an assembly numbering some 15,000 citizens. This architectural marvel, the theatre itself, stood as a monumental testament to Greek civilization, meticulously carved into the verdant hillside nestled beneath the majestic Acropolis. Its exquisitely sculpted marble seating, ascending in flawless arcs, possessed an uncanny ability to transmit sound from the stage to the uppermost echelons with astonishing crystalline clarity. Typically, this hallowed space served as the esteemed host for the profound tragedies penned by Aeschylus and Sophocles, the incisive comedies of Aristophanes, and other monumental dramatic works that delved into the intricacies of human nature through the powerful mediums of myth and narrative. Yet, on this particular day, the essence of human nature was being laid bare through the unvarnished, stark drama of public punishment. The specific indictment under consideration involved 3 individuals accused of illicitly diverting funds designated for various public infrastructure projects. This assembly did not constitute a trial in progress, nor were these men merely on the verge of being found culpable. Rather, this occasion was solely dedicated to the administration of their sentence, a decision having been rendered to utilize the theater precisely because the transgressions were committed against the collective populace, and thus the citizenry merited observing justice being executed in the most conspicuously public manner conceivable. The observer watched intently as the trio of condemned men were escorted into the orchestra by solemn city functionaries. They were attired in unadorned tunics, their feet bare, their hands secured with coarse rope, a stark and poignant contrast to the elaborate raiment typically donned by the performers who graced this very stage. The morning sun, now streaming down from its zenith, illuminated them with an almost theatrical intensity, akin to protagonists in a tragic play. save for the grim reality that their impending suffering would be genuine and unfeigned, not merely portrayed. The vast amphitheater gradually filled to capacity as citizens ascended the ancient stone tiers, seeking vantage points that afforded an unobstructed view of the proceedings. An atmosphere of palpable anticipation permeated the air, distinct from the usual effervescence one might associate with a dramatic presentation. It was characterized less by artistic fervor and more by a potent blend of civic obligation interwoven with a palpable, if somewhat unsettling, morbid curiosity. Many attendees had prudently brought provisions of food and wine, settling in as if preparing for a form of entertainment, which, in a profound sense, it undeniably was. The punitive process commenced with an act of profound public degradation. A herald, his voice meticulously trained to project across the expansive amphitheater, began to enunciate the specific charges leveled against each man. The catalogue of crimes was articulated with painstaking precision. The exact sums of money misappropriated, the public works projects that suffered delays as a direct consequence, and the intricate methodology through which the pilfering was ultimately uncovered and investigated. This exhaustive recitation consumed nearly an hour, effectively transforming the men's perfidy into a protracted, almost epic poem of civic betrayal. What particularly resonated with the observer regarding this public proclamation was its remarkable capacity to transmute inherently private transgressions into shared community narratives. Each citizen present, listening attentively, could grasp with absolute clarity precisely how the actions of these individuals had undermined the city's capacity to maintain its revered temples, to repair its essential thoroughfares, and to adequately finance its cherished festivals. The punishment, therefore, transcended the mere penalization of individual criminals. It served a deeper purpose, actively reinforcing communal bonds and shared ethical principles through the collective, public witnessing of justice being meted out. Following the extensive reading, the proceedings transitioned to the phase of physical chastisement. Each of the condemned men was slated to endure 50 lashes administered with a whip by professional executioners, individuals highly skilled in generating maximal pain and theatrical impact, without, crucially, inflicting mortal injury. The instruments themselves were specifically fashioned for public display, notably longer and more visually imposing than the simpler devices employed in gymnasiums, featuring multiple leather thongs designed to produce impressively dramatic visual effects upon impact. The first man, Lysias, a middle-aged contractor, was subsequently bound to a sturdy wooden post strategically positioned at the very heart of the orchestra. The executioner, with a deliberate flourish, hoisted his whip high, allowing the assembled multitude to fully appreciate the extended reach of the leather thongs before bringing it down with brutal force across Lysias's back. The resounding crack reverberated through the vast theater like a peal of thunder, and one could discern spectators in the most distant rows leaning forward, straining for a clearer view. The inherent theatricality of the setting served to amplify every conceivable aspect of the punishment. Lysias's wrenching cries of agony carried to every single seat with the same acoustic perfection typically reserved for the delivery of tragic soliloquies by actors. His blood, which soon began to seep from the lacerations inflicted by the whip, became plainly visible to thousands of onlookers who could discern every gruesome detail of his suffering. The entire punitive act thus solidified into a shared, visceral experience, serving to bind the community together through the collective observance of justice. Between each succession of lashes, the executioner would deliberately pause, allowing the vast crowd ample opportunity to visually appraise the escalating severity of the injuries, and crucially, permitting the condemned man to fully absorb the profound psychological ramifications of his public exposure. Lysias, in these agonizing intermissions, could discern the faces of citizens he had known for years, individuals who had once engaged his services for construction endeavors, neighbors from his own district, and even former companions who now regarded his profound humiliation with expressions ranging from grim satisfaction to poignant pity, or even outright disgust. The second individual to undergo this ordeal was Nicodemus, a younger man who had served as Lysias's assistant. His punishment proceeded along a similar trajectory, yet the observer noted a discernible divergence in the crowd's reactions, evidently influenced by their prior acquaintance with the individuals involved. Some spectators vocally interjected comments concerning Nicodemus's family, his past reputation, his relative youth, and what they perceived as his inherent foolishness. The punishment thus evolved into a more interactive affair, with the audience actively participating through their spontaneous verbal responses. One could not help but observe the profound manner in which the theatrical space itself imbued the punishment with heightened meaning. Within this particular setting, where citizens habitually converged to witness narratives exploring themes of justice, honor, and the inexorable consequences of human choices, the real-life administration of punishment assumed an almost mythic dimension. The convicted men, in their abject suffering, were transformed into living characters within a morality play. Their torment metamorphosed into a stark lesson concerning civic virtue and the ultimate cost of betraying the trust reposed in the community. The third malefactor, an elderly man named Theophrastus, presented a more intricate challenge to the collective public sentiment. His advanced years rendered the physical chastisement appear considerably more severe, prompting a nascent murmur among some spectators that 50 lashes might, in his fragile state, prove fatal. However, others vociferously countered, asserting that advanced age offered no exculpation for theft, and that extending clemency to criminals would merely serve to foster further transgressions. This contentious debate rippled through the vast crowd, spreading like concentric circles across still water. As Theophrastus endured his allotted punishment, the unfolding scene demonstrated how the theatrical environment facilitated a unique form of democratic engagement in the dispensation of justice. The myriad reactions of the crowd, ranging from enthusiastic cheers to disapproving jeers, from expressions of grim satisfaction to palpable discomfort, collectively generated a dynamic feedback loop. This collective response demonstrably influenced both the executioner's technique and the overarching ambiance of the event. This was not merely punishment observed by the public. It was, in a very real sense, punishment actively shaped by public sentiment. The executioner, acutely aware that he was performing before an audience of thousands, meticulously adjusted his technique throughout the protracted proceedings. When the assembled throng appeared to be in a more bloodthirsty mood, he would deliver harder, more forceful blows, thereby creating more dramatic visual effects. Conversely, when the crowd seemed to be approaching its threshold for gore, he would temper his force, all the while maintaining the rhythmic cadence that kept them thoroughly engaged. He occupied a multifaceted role, part adjudicator, part performer, and undeniably a masterful craftsman of meticulously controlled violence. Subsequent to the physical chastisement, a final, poignant element of public shaming was enacted. Each man was compelled to undertake a slow, deliberate perambulation around the orchestra, openly displaying his wounds to the entire audience, while the herald, for one final time, proclaimed the litany of his transgressions. This perimeter walk consumed several minutes for each individual, meticulously ensuring that every single spectator attained an unblemished view of the dire consequences awaiting those who dared to pilfer from the public exchequer. The somber walk of shame unveiled a spectrum of individual responses to profound public humiliation. Lysias, seemingly utterly broken by the harrowing experience, kept his head bowed throughout. Nicodemus, in contrast, endeavored to preserve some semblance of dignity, maintaining an upright posture despite his evident pain. Theophrastus, perhaps too aged and too profoundly injured to concern himself with outward appearances, stumbled precariously around the circular path, leaning heavily upon a staff thoughtfully provided by the executioner. As the formal administration of punishment reached its conclusion, the observer noted the gradual dispersion of the crowd, imbued with the palpable satisfaction of individuals who had witnessed justice unequivocally served. Conversations spontaneously erupted among neighbors and acquaintances, discussing the perceived appropriateness of the sentences, the comportment of the condemned individuals, and the broader efficacy of public punishment as a deterrent against future transgressions. The magnificent theater had, in this singular instance, fulfilled its profound function as a communal space for fostering collective bonds through a shared moral experience. A segment of the citizenry lingered, perhaps drawn by an innate curiosity to observe the immediate aftermath. The three men were eventually released from their bonds and permitted to retrieve their modest clothing and personal effects before exiting the theater. They moved with evident slowness, clearly in considerable pain, yet they were at liberty to return to their homes and commence the arduous endeavor of rebuilding their lives. The punishment, while undeniably severe, was ultimately temporary, a stark contrast to the finality of exile or execution. It thus extended the possibility of eventual reintegration into the fabric of the community. The observer joined the steady stream of humanity as it flowed out through the theater's cavernous exits, rejoining the familiar rhythm of the city's daily existence. Vendors immediately resumed selling their wares, food and wine, to the departing spectators. Children who had just witnessed the grim spectacle were observed engaging in games that appeared to incorporate elements of what they had just seen. Adults, meanwhile, continued to earnestly discuss the morning's momentous events with the same analytical fervor they might typically bring to a critical review of a profound, tragic drama. Upon ascending the ancient, weathered stone steps that led away from the magnificent theater of Dionysus, the observer found themselves pondering the profound manner in which this dramatic architectural setting elevated the act of punishment beyond mere, straightforward retribution. The sheer majesty of the amphitheater's design, the meticulously crafted ritualistic components of the public ceremony, and the engaged presence of countless Athenian citizens collectively conspired to transmute what might have been an isolated act of individual chastisement into a powerful, communal endorsement of deeply held societal principles and norms. As the afternoon sun, now lower in the sky, stretched long, dramatic shadows across the tiered, vacant seats of the vast auditorium, the central orchestra, where solemn acts of justice had just unfolded, gradually lapsed back into an expectant quietude. This hallowed ground stood poised and prepared for its subsequent dramatic presentation. In the vibrant polis of ancient Athens, whether it involved a captivating tragedy penned by a renowned poet or another morning dedicated to the spectacle of public chastisement, both forms of public display fundamentally served an identical core purpose: to facilitate the community's collective self-comprehension through the vivid, public dramatization of quintessential human narratives. Later that evening, as one sought repose and respite, contemplation might naturally turn to the distinctive way the ancient Greeks ingeniously utilized their most aesthetically magnificent and structurally sophisticated public arena for a dual purpose: both profound artistic expression and rigorous judicial administration. The very architectural elements that imbued tragic poetry with its immense emotional resonance and potency were precisely those that transformed public punishment into a potent form of civic pedagogy. Through meticulously choreographed spectacles of public shame and physical suffering, profound lessons regarding honor, the immutable tenets of justice, and the paramount importance of communal responsibility were indelibly imparted. Following the compelling theatrical drama of public retribution witnessed in Athens, the observer's journey now led them to a profoundly dissimilar Greek city-state, a place where the intricate social mechanics of shame functioned under an entirely distinct and contrasting set of regulations and cultural imperatives. Here, one stood amidst the arid, sun-baked training grounds, situated just beyond the formidable walls of Sparta, observing with keen interest as the ancient world's most formidable and universally respected military society enacted its unique brand of justice. This austere system was meticulously predicated upon an unyielding reverence for honor, which was unequivocally prized above life itself, and a deeply ingrained conviction that an honorable demise was infinitely superior to the enduring stain of dishonor. The individual under scrutiny was named Pantites, a warrior who, only the previous day, had perpetrated what the Spartans unequivocally deemed the most egregious and unpardonable transgression conceivable. He had, in a moment of profound personal failure, deserted his assigned post during the heat of battle, not due to a debilitating wound, nor in compliance with a strategic command to withdraw, but rather because an overwhelming, paralyzing fear had utterly vanquished his rigorous training and compelled him to flee precipitously from the enemy's advancing ranks. Such an act of dereliction, if committed within the more lenient judicial framework of Athens, might have merely incurred a sentence of civic exile or a period of public disgrace. However, in the unyielding society of Sparta, this particular infraction signified a fate considered immeasurably more dreadful and profound than mere physical death itself. The solemn ceremony unfolded precisely at dawn, when the early morning air retained a crisp coolness, and the expansive training ground lay desolate save for the solitary figure of Pantites, his immediate military unit, and the stern-faced officers designated to preside over his impending chastisement. Notably absent were any throngs of inquisitive citizens or the elaborate theatrical embellishments characteristic of Athenian justice. Instead, the scene was defined by the unadorned, stark functionality that permeated every facet of Spartan existence. This particular form of retribution was deliberately conducted in private, for the profound depth of the accompanying shame was deemed far too immense and personal to be subjected to public display or spectacle. Pantites himself stood rigidly at attention, clad in his complete military panoply, a burnished bronze helmet, a sturdy leather cuirass protecting his torso, gleaming bronze greaves encasing his shins, and the iconic circular hoplite shield, an undeniable emblem of his status as a Spartan warrior. His formidable spear rested upright by his side, its sharpened bronze point catching and reflecting the nascent morning light with a cold glint. To any casual onlooker, he presented the quintessential embodiment of Hellenic military prowess and discipline. Yet every individual gathered knew with grim certainty that he was on the precipice of forfeiting the fundamental right to identify himself as a soldier. The unit commander, a hardened and visibly scarred veteran named Alibades, addressed Pantites with the terse, unembellished brevity so favored by Spartan military discourse. His voice, devoid of overt emotion, cut through the still air. Pantites, son of Cleomas, you have irrevocably severed the sacred covenant that binds a warrior to his city. You have deliberately prioritized your own life above the paramount virtue of honor and chosen personal safety over the solemn demands of duty. The profound repercussions of this grave decision must now be unequivocally demonstrated to every man who serves alongside you. The initial agonizing phase of the punishment centered upon the shield, that quintessential hoplite buckler which every Spartan warrior bore and which profoundly symbolized his unwavering allegiance and integral role within the formidable phalanx formation. Pantites was commanded to reverently place his shield upon the dusty ground directly before him, then to grasp a heavy hammer and systematically, deliberately commence its destruction, all while his comrades in arms observed in grim silence. Each resounding blow delivered against the shield's sturdy bronze rim resonated with a hollow, mournful clang, reverberating across the quiet training ground like the somber beat of a funeral drum. The observer watched intently as Pantites, his hands visibly trembling with an agonizing mix of dread and despair, slowly raised the heavy hammer. This very shield had been his constant companion for a full 8 years, accompanying him through innumerable grueling training sessions and bearing witness to the brutal realities of 3 significant battles. Its bronze surface bore the undeniable marks of its history: distinct dents inflicted by enemy weaponry, numerous scratches acquired from traversing unforgiving terrain, and the rich, protective patina that developed over years of meticulous care and upkeep. It was undeniably more than a mere implement of war. It stood as a tangible, potent emblem of his very identity as an elite Spartan warrior. The systematic demolition of the shield was executed with a chilling, thorough completeness. Initially, the robust bronze rim was relentlessly struck and battered until it fractured and grotesquely buckled. Subsequently, the sturdy wooden core was splintered into fragments. The worn leather grips, once firmly secured, were savagely torn away. Finally, the main bronze faceplate was twisted and contorted until it was irrevocably warped beyond any hope of restoration. By the time Pantites concluded his agonizing task, nothing remained but a pitiful scattering of mangled bronze shards, splintered wood, and ripped leather, the desolate remnants, truly a corpse, of a shield that had once valiantly safeguarded both him and his fellow warriors in the crucible of combat. Yet this brutal physical demolition constituted merely the initial phase of his ordeal. What followed was the profoundly symbolic divestment of every item that distinguished Pantites as a revered Spartan citizen. His bronze helmet was carefully lifted from his head by a fellow soldier. His protective cuirass was meticulously unlaced and then withdrawn from his body. His greaves, which had guarded his legs, were systematically drawn off. Finally, his mighty spear was deliberately snapped in two, its shattered components cast unceremoniously onto the growing heap of shield fragments. With the removal of each successive piece of equipment, Alcibiades, his voice resonant with an unyielding solemnity, articulated its profound significance. He declared, "This helmet was fashioned to shield your head, enabling you to safeguard your brothers in arms. This armor enveloped your body, empowering you to maintain the integrity of our battle line. This spear afforded you the crucial reach to repel adversaries from your comrades. All these sacred implements are now utterly devoid of meaning, for you deliberately opted for the ignominy of fear in preference to the immutable virtue of courage." The most profoundly devastating and emotionally crushing segment of the entire ritual arrived when Pantites was compelled to divest himself of his crimson cloak. This vibrant, distinctive garment served as the unmistakable emblem of every Spartan warrior, a sartorial declaration of their elite status, and was famously the very item that Spartan mothers implored their sons to bring back either victorious or as a shroud, imbued with honor. The cloak symbolized, above all else, full membership within the revered warrior brotherhood, representing active participation in that sacred fraternity of men who had taken an inviolable oath to embrace death rather than countenance the disgrace of retreat. The observer keenly perceived the varied and poignant reactions among the other soldiers during this particularly agonizing phase of the punishment. A number of them maintained an unyielding, stoic gaze fixed straight ahead, their countenances as unreadable as chiseled stone, a testament to the rigorous, unyielding discipline that Spartan training had so thoroughly inculcated within them. Others, however, found themselves unable to entirely conceal their palpable discomfort and unease at witnessing a fellow warrior systematically stripped of every tangible symbol and intangible essence that constituted Spartan identity. A select few openly displayed an undisguised disgust, directed not at the severity of the punishment itself, but rather at the egregious act of cowardice that had so regrettably necessitated its execution. Reduced to wearing only a plain, unadorned tunic, Pantites now presented a visual spectacle far more akin to a subservient helot slave than a proud citizen warrior. Yet even this profound humiliation did not signify the culmination of his ordeal. He was now compelled to formally repudiate his fundamental claim to Spartan citizenship by articulating the harrowing words of self-banishment. "I am no longer worthy to stand among the valiant men of Lacedaemon. I consciously choose exile over the honor which I have already irretrievably forfeited." The utterance of these profoundly damning declarations evidently exacted an immense visible toll upon him. His voice audibly fractured, and the crucial words "unworthy" and "lost" were barely audible whispers. It was strikingly apparent that this verbal renunciation proved to be a far more arduous and soul-crushing task for him than the physical obliteration of his military accoutrements. While the breaking of his shield had annihilated his capacity to engage in combat, the pronouncement of these words utterly extinguished his very identity as a Spartan. The ensuing stage of the punishment was arguably the most exquisitely cruel and psychologically devastating of the entire process. Pantites was presented with a stark, agonizing choice. He could depart from Sparta forthwith, never to return, condemned to live out the remainder of his days in perpetual exile amidst foreign peoples who would never truly embrace him. Alternatively, he could elect to reclaim a semblance of his lost honor through the ultimate act of self-sacrifice, death. A gleaming dagger was deliberately placed upon the ground before him, and he was informed that he had until the setting of the sun to make his momentous decision. With this grim pronouncement, his military unit quietly dispersed, leaving Pantites utterly alone on the vast training ground, surrounded by the scattered fragments of his shattered shield and the chilling presence of the dagger that proffered an ultimate, albeit tragic, escape from his unbearable shame. From a discreet distance, the observer watched the solitary figure as he slumped despondently in the dust, his gaze oscillating between the menacing gleam of the weapon and the pitiful fragments of his destroyed shield. Occasionally, he would meticulously gather pieces of the shattered bronze, attempting with poignant futility to reassemble them, as if through this physical act he might somehow mend his irrevocably fractured honor alongside the broken metal. The psychological torment inherent in this protracted waiting period was meticulously calibrated and precisely administered. Pantites possessed countless agonizing hours to ruminate upon his monumental choice, a future existence defined by perpetual exile and profound shame, or a voluntary death that might, in some measure, salvage his tarnished name. Each passing minute served as a relentless, searing reminder of all he had irrevocably forfeited and compelled him to confront the brutal, inescapable ramifications of his singular moment of battlefield cowardice. As the sun ascended higher into the azure sky, casting an increasingly harsh light, the observer noted other soldiers diligently engaged in their rigorous training regimens in more remote sections of the expansive field. With a chilling, deliberate precision, they pointedly disregarded Pantite's presence, treating him with an unnerving detachment as though he were already deceased or had vanished entirely. This imposed social invisibility constituted yet another insidious layer of his multifaceted punishment. He had, in essence, been systematically expunged from the living fabric of the community even prior to making his ultimate agonizing decision between a life of banishment and an honorable death. The arrival of midday offered no respite whatsoever from the relentless, crushing psychological pressure. Pantites made a valiant but ultimately futile attempt to consume a piece of bread from his modest pack. Yet his hands trembled so uncontrollably that he found himself incapable of tearing it apart effectively. He then endeavored to drink water from his personal flask, but his constricted throat seemed entirely unwilling to permit him to swallow. The stark, undeniable physical manifestations of extreme mental and emotional distress were patently evident, even from the observer's considerable distance. Despite his ostensible solitude, it became clear to the observer that Pantites was, in fact, under continuous and rigorous surveillance. Stern-faced officers, strategically positioned at various points around the periphery of the training ground, maintained an unblinking watch over him, poised to intercede immediately should he attempt to abscond without having made his fateful decision. The Spartans, with their characteristic unyielding resolve, intended for him to squarely confront the full, agonizing weight of his shame, rather than permitting him the coward's escape through unchosen flight. As the afternoon wore on, a series of visitors began to arrive, not sympathetic friends offering solace, but rather solemn family members who came to offer their final farewells. Among them was Pantites' father, an aged warrior whose weathered countenance bore the indelible marks and scars of numerous arduous campaigns waged against their Athenian rivals. He approached his son with a face hardened and unyielding, resembling chiseled granite. Their ensuing conversation was notably brief, and by all appearances deeply agonizing for both individuals. The father ultimately departed without a single embrace for his son, his shoulders held stiff and rigid, betraying the immense, tightly controlled emotion seething beneath his outwardly stoic demeanor. Holders rigid with controlled emotion, a stark tableau of internal conflict. As the dusk began to settle, Pantites was observed finally reaching for the dagger. His hands, once perhaps trembling with indecision, were now remarkably steady, as if the arduous day of quiet contemplation had afforded him an unshakable clarity regarding his imminent choice. He uttered no audible sound, yet his lips moved subtly, possibly in a silent supplication to the Olympian deities, or a final, unheard farewell to fallen comrades. The execution of the act itself was remarkably swift and efficient, carried out with the same exacting precision that Spartan military training instilled in every facet of a warrior's existence. Pantites met his end with a valor befitting the life he ideally should have led, confronting his inescapable destiny head-on rather than recoiling from its grim embrace. In this ultimate sacrifice, he managed to reclaim a significant measure of the honor that his earlier act of cowardice had so grievously compromised. The stern-faced officers, who had maintained their vigilant watch, approached the fallen body with expressions that conveyed a grim yet distinct satisfaction. This outcome, while undoubtedly tragic in its finality, epitomized the meticulous functioning of Spartan justice. A man who had once succumbed to fear over his sacred duty had been compelled to face the profound repercussions of his decision, ultimately choosing the path of honor over mere survival. The rigorous Spartan system had, in its own unforgiving way, re-established equilibrium, even at the profound cost of a warrior's life. With the sun descending below the horizon of the training ground, one might ponder the stark contrast between Spartan punitive measures and all other forms of justice witnessed across the Greek world. While other Hellenic city-states typically employed shame as a strategic instrument for societal rehabilitation or as a deterrent against future transgressions, Sparta wielded it as an uncompromising test of inherent character, meticulously separating the truly worthy from the fundamentally unworthy. The symbolic punishment of breaking the shield, for instance, was never conceived as a means to reform the offender. Rather, its profound purpose was to rigorously preserve the unblemished purity and elite status of the warrior class itself. The body was subsequently removed by helots, who would perform the unceremonious task of burying it beyond the formidable city walls, devoid of any distinguishing mark or official mourning ceremony. Nevertheless, among the hardened warriors who bore witness to the day's profound events, Pantites' final resolute choice would undoubtedly be etched into memory, becoming a subject of intense discussion and reflection. He had faltered once, yes, but he had undeniably achieved a good death, and within the unyielding tenets of Spartan culture, a death imbued with courage possessed the potent capacity to redeem even the most egregious of failures. Tonight, as one prepares for rest, the mind might be drawn to contemplate the chilling efficacy of a society that unequivocally prioritizes honor above all life. that deems death a preferable alternative to enduring shame, and that meticulously constructs systems of punishment explicitly designed not to rehabilitate the culpable, but rather to systematically eliminate them from the revered community of the truly worthy. After experiencing the brutal and absolute finality of Spartan honor death, one finds oneself back in the bustling city of Athens for a concluding exploration of Greek punitive practices, encountering perhaps the most subtle and intellectually sophisticated form of justice yet. Here, one sits within the assembly area on Nix Hill, observing as the very mechanism of democracy itself transforms into an instrument of justice, not through dramatic public executions or overt humiliation, but through the quiet and deliberate removal of a citizen's most cherished possession, his political voice. The individual at the heart of today's proceedings is Callus, a prosperous merchant and a long-standing, influential participant in Athenian political life. He stands accused not of any conventional crime that would typically warrant exile, execution, or physical chastisement. Instead, he faces an accusation of something the Athenians regard as equally, if not more, serious: the persistent delivery of misguided counsel to the assembly, consistently steering the city towards policies that ultimately proved detrimental and financially burdensome. The severe penalty under consideration is atimia, a term literally translating to without honor. This constitutes a civic death sentence, which would systematically strip Callus of all his political rights, while still permitting him to reside and conduct his business within Athens. He would effectively become akin to a resident alien within his own native city, physically present, yet entirely absent from the vibrant political life that fundamentally imbues citizenship with its profound meaning in a democracy. One observes as citizens steadily make their way onto Nix Hill for the crucial assembly session that will determine Callus's ultimate fate. The hill itself stands as an impressive testament to democratic ingenuity. Meticulously terraced stone benches, expertly carved into the natural hillside, designed to comfortably accommodate 6,000 citizens, and engineered with remarkable acoustics that ensure a speaker's voice resonates clearly even to the furthest rows. This hallowed ground is precisely where the concept of democracy was conceived, where citizens routinely convened to vigorously debate and decisively shape the city's pivotal affairs. The indictment against Callus is eloquently presented by Demosthenes, a highly skilled orator, who persuasively argues that a consistent pattern of poor judgment in political matters constitutes a profound form of civic incompetence, thereby posing a grave threat to the entire community. Citizens of Athens, he emphatically declares, we do not seek to punish Callus for being mistaken once or twice, for we all, without exception, commit errors. We contemplate punishing him because his errors have been consistent, entirely predictable, and exceedingly costly. The accusations leveled against him are both precise and meticulously documented. 5 years prior, Callus had ardently championed a trade embargo against Corinth, a policy that tragically cost Athens thousands of drachmas and ultimately yielded no discernible benefit. 3 years ago, he lent his support to a military expedition that culminated in an unmitigated disaster. Just last year, his contentious proposal to drastically reduce grain subsidies nearly incited widespread riots among the city's impoverished populace. Each individual misstep might, in isolation, be forgivable, but collectively they paint an alarming pattern of consistently flawed judgment that undeniably jeopardizes the very stability of the city. What renders this particular case so profoundly compelling is its departure from typical charges of corruption, treason, or overt criminal behavior. Instead, it delves into the intricate realm of civic competence. The Athenians are grappling with a fundamental question that continues to challenge contemporary democracies. What course of action should be taken with citizens who consistently advocate for policies that prove unequivocally harmful? How does one judiciously balance the cherished principle of freedom of speech with the vital imperative of safeguarding the community from persistently damaging advice? Callus is afforded the customary opportunity to mount his own defense, and his impassioned speech inadvertently illuminates both the inherent strengths and the undeniable weaknesses that characterized his extensive political career. He is unequivocally intelligent, articulate, and genuinely dedicated to the welfare of Athens. Yet, his judgment has been consistently flawed, and his unwavering confidence in his own opinions has regrettably prevented him from internalizing lessons from his numerous mistakes. He embodies the archetype of a citizen who, despite possessing good intentions, ultimately causes harm through sheer incompetence. One cannot help but observe the assembly's meticulous attention as they listen to both sides, recognizing that their impending decision will establish a significant precedent. Should they vote to impose a timia upon Callus, they would effectively be asserting democracy's inherent right to silence voices that consistently lead the community astray. Conversely, if they vote against punishment, they would tacitly accept that persistent bad judgment, however detrimental, is an unavoidable price to be paid for the fundamental right to free speech. The animated debate persisted throughout the morning as various citizens rose one after another to articulate their distinct perspectives on the complex case. Some passionately argued that the removal of political rights constituted an excessively harsh punishment for what they perceived as mere incompetence. Others vehemently contended that allowing habitually harmful voices to continue participating in democratic deliberations was tantamount to a form of civic suicide. These divergent arguments vividly exposed deep-seated tensions inherent within democratic theory itself. An venerable citizen named Aristophanes delivered a particularly compelling and thought-provoking speech concerning the very essence of democratic participation. "My fellow Athenians," he pronounced with gravitas, "we convene here not simply to hear every voice, but, crucially, to discern and heed wise voices. If we fail to differentiate between citizens who offer invaluable counsel and those who consistently mislead us, how can democracy possibly survive its own inherent freedom?" The voting procedure itself proved utterly fascinating to observe. Each citizen deposited a pottery shard into one of two designated urns, one signifying conviction, the other acquittal. These shards bore a resemblance to those employed in ostracism votes, yet the pervading atmosphere was distinctly different. This was not about expelling a political rival or an individual who had grown excessively prominent. Rather, it centered on the more profound and fundamental question of civic competence within a democratic framework. As the votes were diligently tallied, one could not help but reflect on how profoundly this particular punishment diverged from every other form of justice witnessed across the Greek world. Physical penalties, such as whipping or exposure, directly addressed crimes against the body. Exile, in contrast, dealt with transgressions against the community itself. Atimia, however, addressed something far more abstract and nuanced: crimes against the very quality and integrity of democratic deliberation. The final count revealed a narrow but decisive majority in favor of imposing a timia. The announcement of the decision was not met with triumphant cheers or overt satisfaction. Most citizens appeared to understand that they had undertaken an act that, while deemed necessary, was inherently sorrowful. They had, in essence, protected the sanctity of their democracy by silencing one of its constituent voices, a profound contradiction that visibly troubled even those who had cast their votes in favor of the punishment. The ceremony for imposing a timia was remarkably understated in its simplicity. A herald formally announced the assembly's decision and solemnly declared that Callas was henceforth no longer entitled to speak in the assembly, to cast votes on public matters, to hold any public office, or to initiate legal cases before the courts. His entire political existence concluded with a mere handful of spoken words, quietly and utterly devoid of any dramatic flourish. Callas received the weighty news with an admirable composure, bowing slightly to acknowledge the assembly's solemn decision before turning and walking away from the speaking platform. He remained a citizen in the sense that he retained the right to live and work within Athens, but he had been irrevocably excluded from the political community that fundamentally imbued citizenship with its deepest meaning. It was, in essence, a form of partial death, social rather than physical, yet profound in its far-reaching implications. As the assembly gradually dispersed, one could overhear citizens engaging in animated discussions about the significant implications of the decision they had just rendered. Some voiced genuine concern that this newly established precedent could potentially be exploited to silence unpopular opinions or to suppress political opponents. Others, however, argued fervently that democracy must possess inherent mechanisms for safeguarding itself from voices that consistently inflicted more harm than good. The complex debate, it was evident, continued long after the formal decision had been officially made. The authoritative determination has now been officially established. One observes Callas as he descends deliberately from the historic Pnyx Hill, making his way towards the bustling agora. His physical bearing unmistakably communicates the profound burden of his recent misfortune. This was not the superficial agony of bodily injury, but rather the deep, internal anguish of an individual severed from the very communal engagements that had previously imbued his existence with purpose and significance. He had, in essence, undergone a unique species of civic demise, a condition that, in certain respects, could be perceived as even more devastating than outright physical banishment from the city-state, for it stripped him of his very identity within the Athenian polis. Within the vibrant confines of the agora, Callas found himself approached by acquaintances and commercial partners with a meticulously cultivated politeness, a veneer that barely concealed the underlying tension. However, it was immediately apparent that the fabric of his interpersonal connections had already commenced a discernible alteration, a subtle yet profound reordering. He was no longer regarded as an individual whose political perspectives carried any weight or consequence, nor as a figure capable of swaying public policy or effectively championing the vested interests of others within the hallowed halls of the assembly. His standing within the intricate social hierarchy of Athens had undergone a transformation, manifesting in nuanced yet undeniably impactful modifications that redefined his place and influence in the community. As the day progressed into afternoon, Callus could be observed within the confines of his counting house, meticulously attending to his extensive merchant business. He conducted these commercial affairs with an undiminished aptitude and the same practiced competence he had consistently demonstrated throughout his career in trade. It presented a curious paradox, indeed, that the very individual whose political discernment had been officially branded as detrimental was, in stark contrast, demonstrably prosperous and astute in his private entrepreneurial ventures. This intriguing dichotomy strongly implied that the virtues of civic wisdom and the acumen required for commercial intelligence might, in fact, constitute entirely distinct and separate intellectual faculties, operating on different principles and requiring different forms of expertise. With the gradual descent of evening, the scene shifted to Callus's domestic sphere, where one could observe him amidst his family. While his spouse and offspring offered a display of unwavering support, a palpable awkwardness permeated their interactions, a subtle tension that spoke volumes about the unspoken weight of their new reality. The imposition of Atimia, it became clear, extended its punitive reach far beyond the directly censured individual, casting a shadow over his entire household. It effectively diminished their collective social standing and curtailed any potential for political influence they might once have wielded, thereby impacting their prospects and reputation. Thus, the repercussions of this civic disgrace spread outwards, like concentric circles in a still pond, permeating established family networks and weakening vital social connections across the community. A particularly moving and emotionally charged instant unfolded during the evening meal when Callus's adolescent son, with youthful curiosity, broached the subject of current political affairs. Historically, such dinner-table dialogues would have served as invaluable occasions for the patriarch to impart his seasoned civic experiences and accumulated political knowledge, acting as a mentor to his progeny and guiding them towards responsible citizenship. However, on this evening, an unsettling and profound silence descended, occupying the space where vibrant political discourse had once routinely flourished, a stark testament to the recent judgment. Callus had been effectively disenfranchised, not merely from the active participation in the democratic processes of his city, but also, and perhaps more tragically, from the fundamental duty of cultivating and preparing the succeeding generation for their own future engagement in civic life and public service. As the time for departure from the ancient city of Athens drew near, one's thoughts inevitably turned to ponder the profound implications of this ultimate sanction. The suppression of an individual's political voice, this definitive deprivation, emerged as perhaps the most refined and intelligently conceived form of justice observed throughout the journey. This particular form of retribution profoundly acknowledges that within a democratic framework, the exercise of political expression is not merely an inherent right, but equally a significant responsibility, a civic duty. Furthermore, it posits that a sustained and evident lack of competence in matters of public administration can inflict damage as severe and pervasive as that resulting from intentional malfeasance or corruption. The application of Atimia, therefore, illuminates a fundamental and deeply insightful aspect of Greek democracy itself. It underscores that this system was not predicated upon the notion that all perspectives held identical intrinsic value, but rather on the conviction that truly sagacious and effective deliberation necessitated a rigorous discernment between voices that offered genuine utility and those that threatened to introduce detriment or chaos. In essence, The citizens of Athens demonstrated a remarkable willingness to cede a measure of individual liberty and expression in order to vigilantly safeguard the integrity and efficacy of their collective decision-making processes, thereby ensuring the stability and prosperity of the polis, prioritizing communal welfare over unbridled individual assertion. As the present evening draws to a close, and one prepares to seek repose following this extensive intellectual journey through the multifaceted landscape of Greek penal practices and judicial philosophies, one might naturally begin to contemplate how each distinct method of correction encountered serves to illuminate varying facets of ancient societal values and ethical frameworks. Spanning the spectrum from the overtly theatrical and brutal cruelty exemplified by the infamous bronze bull to the subtle yet profound civic ostracism embodied by Atimia, the ancient Greeks undeniably cultivated a remarkably sophisticated and nuanced comprehension of precisely how diverse manifestations of justice could effectively address and fulfill a wide array of distinct social requirements and communal imperatives, ensuring both order and cohesion. And perhaps, as one's consciousness begins to gently recede towards the embrace of sleep, a lingering question might arise: whether contemporary societies have, in the passage of time, relinquished some measure of that profound sophistication in their own modern approaches to penal justice. One might ponder if our current systems of punishment truly serve our communities with the same efficaciousness and societal benefit as those meticulously crafted mechanisms served the thriving polis of ancient Athens. Ultimately, the question remains as to what invaluable lessons might still be gleaned from these distant yet illuminating experiments in the perpetually challenging and intricate art of fostering harmonious coexistence within a civilized human collective, and how their insights might inform our present-day dilemmas. The provided textual fragment, concluding with iety, appears to be incomplete, thereby precluding the comprehensive execution of the rephrasing task as stipulated, to meticulously adhere to the intricate instructions which mandate the preservation of original length and structure, the enrichment of language through diverse vocabulary and grammatical constructs, the unwavering consistency of factual details and terminology, and the maintenance of a specific journalistic narrative tone. A complete and coherent original passage is indispensable. Without the entirety of the text, the delicate process of crafting an expanded yet faithful rendition, while upholding the specified third-person perspective and main idea clarity, regrettably cannot be undertaken.